Mute yourself, comrades.
Thank you. And then
you go out in public without headphones. You might have to talk to someone.
I talk to people, you know,
so
in all kinds of situations.
My experience is anyone that's worked in a corporate office has a pair of headphones because it is the universal signal for don't approach me. I don't want to talk to you. And it's the only message they receive. Otherwise, yeah, telling people to fuck off, I'm busy, gets you in a meeting with HR, and no one's got time for that.
I wear headphones like on subways, on the way to work, all the rest of it, without even playing anything.
Yeah,
I just want to have.
Yeah,
exactly. Like half the time I haven't charged them, but you know, you don't want to be approached by people, and if you're approached by people, you're like.
When I worked on a factory floor in a food distribution warehouse last year, we were banned from wearing headphones or earphones.
Oh my!
We had to listen
so that they could show up and bother you.
So that when they shouted at us, we could hear them. And we did have music, mind you. It was Kiss FM, which plays. Yeah, Ryan's shaking his head.
I'm
English
so sorry for you. And now I understand why you reject capitalism.
Well,
and this is what radicalized you.
We had to listen to this. So yeah, we weren't allowed to wear headphones or earphones.
That sounds as good as intro and any to get us started. So, gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking, podcast where we try to explore a narrative beyond the tired tropes of left versus right and explore some radical alternatives. Today we have some esteemed guests who I'm very honoured to have. Very much looking forward to the conversation. I have chatted late into the night over a few drinks with all of you at this point. Duncan's excited. He's taking his clothes off for the benefit of our podcast listeners. So I'm going to try and introduce you all, and then you can correct me. How's that?
That sounds perfect. I'm looking forward to correcting you.
Lovely. So Toby is co-host of Beyond Binary Thinking. He's studying to be a master historian, but potentially even a doctor of history, which would be amazing. I love that. And he's also a Lord of Sarcasm for the podcast, which is often sorely needed as we disappear up our own asses trying to speak intellectually. Brenton Lengal is author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, a Ringo-nominated amazing book, which you can buy. He's also doing a fantastic animated novel about Buenaventura Durruti, a superb anarchist, which is why today he's representing the anarchist side of the conversation. Recently discovered that you were actively involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Oh yeah. That was where I got started.
Managed to avoid getting blackpilled. Congratulations.
Yeah, it was there. Amazingly enough, I think the movement for the most part left me with a lot of hope. A big part of that was that I had read George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia before going to Occupy, and so like I'd basically been advised of all the pitfalls of leftist organizing by one of the greatest authors of all time. So when bad stuff did happen, you know, I was able to put it in context, and it didn't bother me as much.
Lovely. When he's not doing that, you'll find him being a supreme debate bro, and I mean that with no insult whatsoever. If you haven't seen Brent take down some of the alt-right's worst YouTubers, I need to put down a compilation reel of just some of your knockout hits. My personal favorite is Stefan Molyneux, who deserves some eggs throwing at him, which you did with great aplomb. So thank you for that. Next up, we have Ryan Aldred, who, a dear friend. I met him because he was being interviewed by the Plymouth Herald, helping students protest against the rent strikes during the last year's lockdown. I know him as a member of the National Committee of the Socialist Party, but you should know him as a friend. He's as wise as his beard implies. Did I miss anything from that intro?
No, although interesting that me and Brenton have a similar kind of starting ground, because Occupy was one of the first things I got involved with.
No, this is wrong. I need you to fight. You must be enemies.
Well, he obviously drew the wrong conclusions, but
we'll get on to that. Finally, Duncan, one of the most erudite, fascinating, and heavy drinking socialists I've had the pleasure of meeting in the last year. Duncan, I have learned a lot from you. Sadly, for both of us, I remember more than either of us would like. But no, you're a brilliant person. And I understand at the moment you're teaching literature to people that otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to learn. Is that right? Anything else you'd like to introduce yourself as?
Thanks, Chris. I remember you fondly as well. I teach kids who've been failed at school for various reasons beyond their own control to get their GCSEs. I don't know what the equivalent qualification is in America, to get their maths and English so they can go out into the world of work and be exploited on the same terms as the rest of us. You know, that's my job.
Superb. Thank you so much. So, gentlemen, I need to once again reiterate that this is not a debate. And the whole point of this podcast is not to believe that there's a single final answer, a simplicity. I've enjoyed very much conversations with all of you. What I find most frustrating about the online leftist debates about anarcho-kiddies versus tankies is that everyone's really sure about their utopia and exactly how to get there, and everyone else who disagrees with them is entirely wrong. And there's 17,000 flavors of, I haven't even learned all the acronyms yet, sorry, but I believe I'm a traditional SOCDEM, I guess. So yeah. So
worse than the fascists.
Yeah. So I'll start there. I'm left of most people I interact with, present company excluded. I'm certainly left of Jeremy Corbyn, shall we say. I believe that the current system is untenable, unsustainable, and if you count the actual costs in terms of pollution, catastrophe, third world poverty, and so on and so on, I'm preaching to the choir, needs to be abolished, probably through violent means. At the same point, I kind of still don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. I think some meritocracy in that system would be good. I think the straw man of communism is that, you know, that guy and his family runs things, and I'm keen to avoid that. And I'd also like to see, you know, democracy in its proper form. So the majority of people's interests being recognized and represented. And so, yeah, does that make me a weirdo? I don't think so.
Right. Well, you know, Marx and Engels and his followers, the early communists, originally all called themselves, as you do, Chris, social democrats. This was the name that they gave to themselves, that it wasn't associated with, you know, Scandi social democracy or, you know, the modern Labour Party or anything like this. You know, social democracy meant democracy that meant for the many a way of changing their lives rather than a means for a tiny clique of capitalists to control politics, to control society. Social democracy versus, you know, private democracy or bourgeois democracy. That was what the original revolutionaries called themselves. So it's not a term that that inspires feelings of hate in me. It's what we originally called ourselves, all of us, where it would have been social democrats, were it not for the fact that this term is now associated with all kinds of left reformist, you know, even, you know, Joe Biden, would he call himself a social democrat? Maybe that's stretching things slightly, but it encompasses a range of thought which it had a much more specific meaning when it was first come up with. So the social to be a social democrat is not a bad thing, I would say.
Thank you, Duncan. So in hip hop terms, I'm OG, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, let's go around then, and everyone describe their acronyms. if I had to put a label on you, let's start there.
All right. I'll go, I guess. So for those of you listening, if you haven't caught my voice, this is Brenton Lengal, author of Durruti, former Occupy Wall Street guy. I would say if you have to put a label on me, don't put a label on me, man. Just use anarchist. But if you want to get more specific than that, the tradition of anarchism that I am most interested in right now is the anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism that grew out of the philosophy of Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, Mikhail Bakunin, and Peter Kropotkin, as most famously seen in Spain. Now, that's not something that I'm going to cleave to 100%. I don't like the idea of identifying with a particular political party or movement or philosophical tradition necessarily, not because I don't find things valuable in them, but I find that team bias begins to affect us, and I want to keep my mind as free of that as possible. So, while I tend to agree with the left far more than the right, I have even, gone so far as to say that I'm not a classical leftist, even though 99% of the time I'm probably agreeing with them because, have you seen the right? So essentially, what I am most interested in at this point is creating a society in which we can maximize everyone's freedom and autonomy overall, since you have to give up a certain amount of freedom and autonomy to society in order to function and get the things that you need. I think we can't, that's the project of civilization, essentially. We bind ourselves together and give up a little bit so that overall we can survive and thrive. I think the most important thing with this, however, is that we need to work on the distribution of power. Traditionally, power by society, you think of a power vacuum, has been filled with several large boulders. Monarchy, oligarchy, these presidents and kings. I'm of the mind that instead we take all those institutions and we smash them down into thousands and millions of tiny boulders or sand, if you like it. We plug the vacuum that way. Ideally, we get into a position where each person's power is roughly equal to every other person's power, and we check each other and prevent anyone from essentially rising above and putting on airs. Because as soon as a human is able to seize the reins of power, it becomes self-justifying, and you get into a negative feedback loop where suddenly you have, Jeff Bezos launching himself into space, while, the average American can't stand a unforeseen $500 expense, and something like as many as 1 in 6 children don't know where their next meal is coming from. So I think what we need to do is we need to be skeptical towards institutions and authorities, and we need to keep things as even keel as possible within society. There's a lot of ways to do that, and that's why I identify with the anarchist tradition overall.
That's lovely. Thank you. Toby, are you going to go next then?
I mean, I very much agree with Brent as far as identifying with any sort of political movement, then yes, sort of anarcho-syndicalism has always been most attractive to me, because it involves having workers organizing and actually profiting from their labor, which I believe is a good thing for workers to get the things that's owed to them. And I believe that whole capitalist mode production, it's inherently designed just to profit the people at the top, etc., sloganeering and rhetoric. However, ultimately, what Brent went into there is a really fascinating thing about how our modern society, how our nation states have been constructed. Because we started with quite small units that over time has been blobbed up and conglomerated and into larger and larger building blocks. However, it would be nice to go back to those independent small units again. I mean, it has worked in the past. The reason why we all banded, like the reason why we're forced into these nation states is purely because of coercion, war, domination, and also in terms of Germans, a bunch of incestuous interbreeding. However, in a modern world, in a sort of future world, if we can overcome the sort of petty needs of conflict and fighting, there's no reason why humanity can't be organized along smaller, more autonomous lines.
I agree 1000%. Of course, that's kind of the game as well, because, you know, the nation state built itself out of armies, you know, because after the fall of feudalism, you know, castles stopped being a effective means of defense. And so what we found was that, you know, units, the nations or military units, or however you want to call it, that could field large armies and equip them with the best in technology, cannons, for instance, were going to be more successful. And so, you know, nation states swept over the globe, and all of us were essentially forced into, you know, this relationship with it. People didn't think of themselves as members of a nation before the military and the police created that relationship. The question, of course, then becomes, how do we get past that? And, you know, it may be a type of technological invention, the modern equivalent of the cannon that makes armies obsolete, you know, or it might be global warming, just destroying our ability to field mechanized infantry.
We need,
you know,
we need merman infantry. But before we get into that, let's have Ryan and Duncan introduce themselves and their labels, for want of a better term.
So yes, I'm an international socialist, an internationalist socialist. I follow the Marxist tradition, and specifically the Trotskyist understanding of Marxism. You know, the idea that Marx and Engels kind of developed some of the theories around class understandings and class analysis of the political economy, which were then furthered by Lenin and the Bolsheviks, and then furthered more so by Trotsky, who formed part of the left opposition against the Stalinist degeneration of the workers' state in Russia. So therefore, as a Trotskyist, I'm actually not a tanky, because tankies were those that supported the invasion of, I think it was Hungary, with the Soviet tanks that came in to crush the uprising that took place there. But you know, as an international socialist, you know, I certainly agree with a lot of the points that have been raised by Brenton and Toby. You know, the development of nation states out of sort of feudal society, you know, with you know, nation states came about this alongside capitalism. It was a necessary means through which to continue the, you know, the domination of the class of the bourgeois. But you know, as a socialist, I recognize that we need to overthrow the bourgeois. You know, you know, I'm part of a revolutionary international that organizes around the world. I certainly disagree with a lot of, you know, there's certainly a lot to be said of you know, the skepticism of the main political parties, certainly. But you know, where I would disagree, I think, with some of the points that have been raised so far, is that I believe that you do need to organize through political parties. You do need to have that level of cooperation, and I certainly recognize the dangers of organizing in political parties. Having, you know, myself come through the Occupy movement, I was very skeptical when I first got involved, because, you know, I came out with a kind of anti-party mood to begin with. But you know, the key part of being involved in an organization is that you be that check and balance. You know, for instance, our organization, whenever we take elected positions in, you know, parliament or in trade unions, we have to commit to taking the average worker's wage, so that you can't distance yourself from the people you're trying to represent. But you know, similarly, ensuring things like the right of recall, to ensure that if anyone does stop representing the views that you as an organization would like to put forward, it's about putting those checks and balances in to ensure that you're not ever allowing sort of power to fall into a bureaucratic elite. And therefore, you're constantly sort of refreshing and checking and stopping any hegemonic domination at the top. And so, I having gone through, we'll probably touch back on this in a minute. I don't want to go too much in the conversation before Duncan's introduced himself, but I think, seeing some of the dangers through not organizing openly and, having elected positions and so on, which, certainly I imagine there'll be criticisms about the dangers of hierarchical organization, but I've seen the danger at the other end where we don't openly organize and sort of elect those positions, and then you see the power, the hierarchies and power dynamics form, but without any checks and balances to stop the those that are kind of taking charge surreptitiously from being able to be held back. So anyway, I'll leave my comments there for now and pass over to Duncan.
Are you not going to introduce me, Chris?
I already did at the start, mate. So now I think it's for you to introduce yourself. What do you consider your labels and your philosophical positions?
That's all I was looking for.
I thought Ryan did it perfectly. So
I'm Duncan. I'm a Trotskyist. Like Ryan, I think there were some very good points made by Brenton and Toby. I think what's missing in this, hostility towards authority and hierarchy, and this idea that anyone who's put in a position of power is automatically going to be corrupted, is a class analysis. So, the reason that people are put into positions of authority under capitalism, screw us over under every opportunity, send us into imperialist wars, create policies that are utterly against our own welfare, is not because they are bad people who we've put in power. It's because they represent a class. It's because they represent a system. Capitalism demands profit. It demands that capitalists be able to exploit the wage labour, the labour power of workers, to create surplus value. And so to expect them to do anything else is like expecting, a stone that you drop to move upwards. It's like it goes against the law of gravity. It's like a law of nature. It's not because of something intrinsically wrong with hierarchy or authority. It depends on the class situation. So if we had a state that was run by workers, if instead of hedge fund managers and company directors and people like we've just had in England, this probably isn't relevant to the United States, but in England, we're having a big row at the moment over corruption in Parliament. There's an MP called Geoffrey Cox, who's the constituency MP for the constituency next to ours, North Devon, right? And he spent the COVID pandemic in the Virgin Islands advising companies in the Virgin Islands how they could avoid paying corporation tax in the UK. Was paid £6 million for his services, whilst being the constituency MP for North Devon, right? That is why anarchists abjure hierarchy, I think. People look at this system, they see who's in power, they see these structures, and they think, the whole idea of people being in charge, it just doesn't work. It's not about power structures, it's about class, it's about who is in charge and who they represent and who is in power. So, Ryan and me are both part of an organisation called the Committee for Workers International. Back in the 1980s, we had members of parliament in Britain who are on a worker's wage, who took, you know, the average wage of a worker in their constituency and campaigned for their constituents for the what they wanted. They led the fight against the poll tax. Margaret Thatcher wanted to impose a flat tax on all people in the UK, and we fought against that. You know, these were great fighters, but they were in positions of leadership. They were members of parliament. They were elected. The problem isn't hierarchy in itself. You know, having power, as long as you are accountable to the people who put you in that power, as long as you are in a instantly revocable, in the phrase of Lenin, as long as you're not, if you do something the workers who put you in that position don't like, you can be taken away. As long as you're representing the people who put you in that position of authority, you know, that is the point. If we try to organize in this non-hierarchical, disorganized way, I mean, how did the Occupy movement end up? I'm very interested to hear from Brent and Ryan quite what that eventuated in, because to me, being on the outskirts of it, the lack of decision making, the lack of authority, the inability to agree on a basic set of demands led to the movement dissipating.
Can I just come in quickly?
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure you want to respond, and I'll give you ample time. I just want to come in quickly. I think the running narrative of the media was, who are these people and what do they want? We don't know. It's a mystery. And you can literally show like 47 news stations saying, we don't know what they want. We don't know what they want. And then when you talk to any of the leadership, and I think this is what people often don't realize, is there was a leadership team in Occupy. They had 4 very clear bullet points of what they wanted. And
it wasn't just 4 very clear bullet points.
Over to you, Brenton.
Yeah, no. All right, so I don't know what part of Occupy Ryan, for instance, was involved in. He may have had a different experience. I was with Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park in New York. So the idea that we were disorganized and didn't have that is 100% a media narrative. It simply was not the truth. If anything, we were over organized, in my opinion. So Occupy Wall Street, first off, from I think 1 month after the initial occupation of Zuccotti Park, came out with the Declaration of the Occupation of Zuccotti Park, which had a series of, like, I think 27 bullet points, and was based, the language in it was actually based very strongly after the Declaration of Independence. So first off, that was put out, that was voted on, and the entire document was ratified via consensus process. So yeah, we definitely were heavily organized. And this is the thing that a lot of people misunderstand about anarchists. We do not and have never rejected authority in the abstract. I mean, this goes back to Mikhail Bakunin in 1871. Does it follow that I reject all authority? Far be it. In the matter of boots, I defer to the authority of the bootmaker. In the matter of houses, canals, and railroads, I appeal to the engineer. In the matter of specialized knowledge, I appeal to such and such savant. But I do not allow the bootmaker or the engineer or the savant to go beyond that and impose his authority upon me. I listen to them, forgetting the Victorian thing, but essentially I listen to experts. We have organizations that have formal hierarchies. What we oppose is the state, which is to say the group of armed men who enforce private property laws upon the rest of us. The hierarchical organization of police chiefs and generals, because ultimately, when you talked about it being a class issue, for instance, and I agree. I think in a lot of ways the state does function as a class issue because the state is a hierarchical institution by its design. Small group of people at the top give orders to a large group of people at the bottom, who would then enforce those orders onto a very much larger group of people with regard to the use of force and violence. Now, that tiny group of people at the top, even if they're the best people in the world, if you are in a position to command armies and police forces, even if you take a worker's wage, and I'm very happy that, you know, you guys are doing that. That's a good check on someone becoming corrupted. But I mean, Michael Bloomberg, for instance, took a $1 salary for running New York City, and he was no friend of the worker.
The most benevolent man in the world.
Yeah. Now, you want to ask, like, what happened with Occupy Wall Street? Well, I remember what happened with Occupy Wall Street, and that was in the middle of the night on November 15th, 2012. Helicopters were deployed on the order of Michael Bloomberg to prevent news coverage from the air. Michael Bloomberg called the head of the New York Times, and before he did his raid, he got the okay that the New York Times, no matter what happened, they would take his side on this. And then he released the NYPD, the third, what it was, like 8th largest army in the world by the amount of people in there, to raid the park, grab my friends, drag them out of their beds. They intimidated reporters. And then the next day on the news, everyone was like, well, they just needed to clean the park. This was bullshit from the very beginning. Occupy did not fall apart. We didn't fall to infighting. Our organization had its problems, like any other organization, but it wasn't disorganization that took us apart. It was Michael Bloomberg in New York working with the NYPD and the other powerful people within the country, and it was a coordinated effort by mayors and law enforcement throughout the country to evict these occupations. And then after that, then the movement eventually fell apart without a nucleus.
But this is a core issue. How would a anarchist society defend itself against a superior oppressive power? In which case, if
isn't that what always happens?
There's the whole argument for wanting to create a state in order to create a centralized group of protection,
which was why the militia system was so important within the Spanish Republic. The revolution lived and died based upon the militia system because it was specifically a non-hierarchical way to wield military power, where the actual armed men were accountable not to a group of elites, but to their actual communities.
But what would have happened if Occupy started firing on the police?
I mean,
who would have won that combat?
So that these are two very different situations. So you have a group of protesters within the United States in 2011, 2012, trying to show that another world is possible, to build a new society within the shell of the old. Obviously, you know, there was no chance at that point for military conflict between occupiers and the police. Now we began to see the rumblings of that within like the CHOP/Chaz. So there have been times where like the state's power, even recently, even within American cities, has fallen temporarily. And this is the beginning of a process.
Point of clarification, CHOP/Chaz?
So that was in Seattle, it was Chaz. It was the
something Heights autonomous zone.
Yeah. It was an autonomous zone. What happened was that in the fallout of the police killing of George Floyd, there were protests all over the country. And in certain areas, particularly, in the Heights autonomous zone, protesters were actually able to like drive the police out and take over the area temporarily. Like the actual police pulled out of the police station in that area. And you saw something a little bit more like a more militant version of Occupy Wall Street. Now, bad things happened largely because fascists, which hadn't been around during Occupy, started attacking, like literally attacking people. And then there were like other issues with the police and back and forth. It was not a stable society, but it was another attempt to build this. Now, there was no formalized militia there, but as these things continue and as state power continues to crumble, people will look to organize in different ways. And we can learn lessons from both Occupy and CHOP/Chaz.
Which is that we need more weapons.
I mean, see, this is interesting here because, you know, so I'm a Buddhist. And like, I am somewhat of the point that I don't think you can necessarily, I'm not a complete pacifist, but I don't think you can necessarily kill your way to a more peaceful world. We have never succeeded at, you know, bloodless revolution before. There've been some, there's been some that have been close, but that doesn't mean that everything that happened in the past is always necessary to happen in the future. I think there are potentially ways of organizing which might not require, you know, a bloodbath. But that said, you know, it's never happened before, and I think people should be prepared to defend themselves and to defend the new world that they're building, because it will be attacked, definitely.
Thank you, Brent. So, Duncan, Ryan, do you find any of that objectionable? What I often find, as I said in my start, is that, like, are you disagreed, or is it just the labels and the order of things that happen?
There's a lot of common ground there, and you know, I think one of the things that's important to recognize is, you know, we are revolutionary socialists, and so, you know, we don't want to maintain the current bourgeois state. You know, we engage in elections, but we recognize the limitations of bourgeois democracy. You know, this is why we engage in trades councils, for instance, and engage in our trade unions, because we recognize that these, you know, effectively are the germs of a new society, potentially, with, you know, workers. You know, when we've seen revolutions, we see, you know, strike committees and the semi-spontaneous, like, coming together of different organizations that form kind of workers' councils or Soviets, if we look at the case of the Russian Revolution. And so, you know, in those examples, you know, we certainly see a lot of agreement there. I think some of the disagreement would be, I think, in the ways in which we would see the dissolution of the state. You know, we, as a socialist, we recognize the oppressiveness of the state. You know, we recognize the special bodies of armed men that are there, you know, the police and the armed forces that are there to protect the interests of the capitalist class. And obviously, they're not going to just go, yeah, you know what, guys, yeah, we've taken all these billions and trillions of dollars in wealth off the backs of your labor. Actually, we got it wrong. We're really sorry. Here you go. Here's everything back. Yeah, my bad. Like, and so, you know, in recognizing the organization of this class, you know, it's about trying to build the consciousness of ordinary working class people to recognize, you know, as Marx said, that working class people are a class in and of themselves, but they need to recognize their class interest and become a class for themselves. And so, you know, we would like to see what Lenin referred to as the dictatorship of the proletariat, where workers seize power. You know, we take control of the levers of the state. But I think where there may be some disagreement on is that, you know, we would like to see the dissolution of the state, but we recognize that you don't just dismantle a state overnight. You know, you would need to defend against the capitalist class, because, you know, even if workers seize power, until we've reorganized society and had the transformation where by the means of production are, you know, democratically organized, you know, I would like to see a socialist plan of production where we're utilizing the best of our technique, and also organizing on an international basis, you know, rather than having the pitting of different nation states for limited resources against each other. And so, you know, this idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat is a kind of sticking point, I think, sometimes, because obviously the very word dictatorship in itself is a worrying term when used out of context. But the idea being that the dictatorship of the proletariat is the dictatorship of the majority class, i.e. the working class, in their millions, over the danger of the resurgence of the capitalist class, until you get to a point where there is no need. You know, if you manage to reorganize society and ensure that the political economy is in the hands of workers, things are under workers' control and management, you would then see what Engels referred to as the withering of the way of the state, because there's no need to defend private property when that's the very thing we seek to abolish. But when we look at the example of the Russian Revolution, for instance, the capitalist class will go beyond anything to try and dismantle and disrupt and destroy any attempts at moving towards this kind of system. We saw the invasion of a 21 nation army into the Soviet Union to try and crush communism. We saw in the Paris Commune that being dismantled. We've seen, you can't have a kind of pocket of a utopian socialist or anarcho-communistic organized society, because it fundamentally attacks the idea of bourgeois society, and so it's a threat. And I think even when we look at the example of Occupy, that in itself, I mean, here in the UK, the Occupy movement got labelled as a mild domestic extremist threat, just because you had a couple of tents in St. Paul's and so on. And
there were plans drawn up to assassinate the leaders of Occupy Wall Street that got released as a part of like the, thankfully we didn't have leaders, but
I don't know if Toby and Brent are aware of this, but famously the head of the Church of England, the new head of the Church of England shortly after the Occupy movement, came out in support of the movement, and his background, actually, he used to work in finance and then found religion.
And he's now a humble archbishop. Good for him.
Yeah,
pull himself up by the bootstraps. I like that. That's good.
So there's, if I can be a ginormous nerd for just a second, just to respond to Ryan with regard to the dictatorship of the proletariat, you cannot wield it. None of us can. The state answers to capital alone, and this is really key, actually. Now, I'm being kind of funny with the way I'm putting that, but again, when you look at the nature of these hierarchical organizations, with a small group of people at the top giving orders to a large group of people at the bottom who have no choice but to follow those orders, enforcing those orders on an even larger group of people, the people within society who are put into the position of commanding them become a class in and of themselves, no matter the salary they may take, because someone's class identity isn't based upon how much money they make. It's based upon their relationship to the means of production. So when your job is to command generals and police chiefs, you have a totally different relationship to the means of production than the average worker. Following this logic out, it means that essentially you can never have a dictatorship of the proletariat. You can only have a dictatorship on behalf of the proletariat. So we can, working from that, you can maybe get people into those positions who remember who they are, for a temporary period of time. But again, these social relationships work to replicate themselves. And so like you essentially, this commander class of whoever they are, they're not workers, and they can't be workers because they don't work. So until we get to a point where, say, we could use swarm technology maybe to take the individual inputs of all the workers in a country and feed them into a robot that commands the state. And I think people would have a lot of problems with that, because we can't see and we can't know that that's how it works. You can't really have a dictatorship of the proletariat. It's a physical impossibility. Trying to take the state and make it respond to the workers, it's not what the machine was built to do. Like, you can turn your lawnmower upside down and use it as a wood chipper, and maybe you'll chip a couple of branches, but it's dangerous and unstable, and it's not because it's a lawnmower, not a wood chipper. It's a state, not whatever we're trying to build here. So I think the attempt is admirable. But I think there's a definite problem in execution within physical reality. So unless we change the institution, and hence the the egalitarian approach with regard to the militias, we keep finding ourselves back in the same place where we started.
I mean, just in response to that, I think, you know, when you look at the example, and I go to the example of the Soviet Union because it was, you know, the first successful socialist revolution, and to this date is one of the, you know, one of the least contentious in terms of how it initially came about. Obviously, you know, if you look at Cuba and so on, there was certainly shortcomings there. When we saw the example of the Soviet Union in its early years, obviously before Stalin came to power, and we saw the bureaucratic degeneration. You know, one of the important things to recognize is that in the workers coming to power, you didn't just see new people at the helm. You started to see the fundamental transformation of it into a new society. We saw, you know, effectively Parliament, or the State Duma, being wound up because, you know, effectively it didn't have a purpose anymore, because, you know, the Soviet power structures became the new force in society. And those, you know, they're not just simply, you know, a changing of the guard and a changing of the name. The Soviets represented, as I said, kind of like the strike committees, the organized working class, and so, you know, these were huge delegated bodies representing millions of workers. And when you start to see the transformation of the state in a socialist direction, you know, it isn't just about sort of going, well, you know, we're going to now take control of the armed forces and do things differently, and, you know, trust our word on it. You know, introducing things like allowing the police to engage in trade unionism, having the armed forces, you know, democratically electing their leaderships rather than sort of being having an officer class that gave orders and a very strict hierarchy. That in itself starts to then provide a new check and balance on things. But, you know, again, this is why it's important to recognize it and put forward the idea of the right of recall in any, you know, anything we organize in, because, you know, ultimately you have to have that check and balance against anyone sort of going rogue, or you know, if we look at the example of Stalinism, which showed the dangers of the centralization of power. You know, they, through the war communism years, they centralized power to deal with the threat of the invasions, but in so doing laid the groundwork for Stalin to take the helm and completely destroy everything that had been built up to at that point. And I think, you know, this is why I think you can have a dictatorship of the proletariat, and this is why it's important to recognize that that the goal of having that dictatorship isn't to maintain a dictatorship of the majority over the minority. You know, the goal is to seize the means of production, put them into workers' hands, and ensure that, you know, effectively, therefore, you know, over time you have the withering away of the state, because there's no need to defend any kind of private property anymore, because we're doing away with that. We're, you know, trying to democratically organize and plan our economy so that it delivers what people and the planet need. And then, you know, in so doing, we could start then having, you know, heated debates about, you know, where do we put our resources? Do we, you know, invest more in space travel? Do we invest in curing cancer? What do we use our limited resources for to ensure that, you know, we can move forward as you know, human beings? And obviously some of that is, you know, somewhat conjecture, because, you know, until we achieve that level of organization, you know, it's certainly something I'd like to see happen in my lifetime. And, you know, like I said, I agree on a lot of the different points raised, but I think the fundamental difference, I think, for me, is that, you know, as a socialist, I think we do need to organize in parties. We do need to overthrow the bourgeois system, but we can't simply dismantle the state in a day. We do have to, you know, try to transform society along those socialist directions by introducing some of these checks and balances, by trying to seize the means of production and put them into the hands of workers. And that's why, for instance, and obviously, you know, I wouldn't go into the streets of Plymouth here in the UK today and just suddenly start calling for the arming of workers at this point. It's far, you know, too far in advance of where we are, you know, understanding the kind of class position we're in. But there are points in time where we very much put that idea to the forefront, because there is an objective need. For instance, if we take the example of the Pinochet coup in Chile, you know, the Allende government foolishly ignored the calls by those on the left to arm the workers, because the workers could see the danger that was coming with the Pinochet junta coming to smash the state and squeeze, you know, the lifeblood out of the workers' movement. And so, you know, in those situations, we have to put forward the idea of the arming of workers, because, you know, if we don't, then obviously, you know, when you're in a situation where there is a group of armed people and a group of unarmed people, there's very usually only one outcome that comes out from that. But obviously, during periods of revolutionary upheaval, you often see some of these organizations like the police and the armed forces split along class lines, because, you know, largely speaking, those that are recruited to the police and the armed forces usually are from the ranks of the ordinary working class. They can obviously, you'll start to see the shifting as society polarizes. You know, particularly in the police, you start to see the more rightward elements of society engaging in the police, as some of those horrified by the actions that they're having to undertake, you know, moving away from that. We saw, for instance, in Spain a little while ago, you know, you saw the militarized police surrounding Parliament and protecting the Parliament from protesters, but you had the ordinary kind of police going on strike because they were, you know, they were also affected by the austerity measures implemented by their government. And so I think, you know, when coming to these questions,
that's common for Spain, by the way. They've had two different sets of police officers shooting at each other multiple times.
But fundamentally, you're not taking power through parliamentary means. You are going to need some sort of insurrectionary vanguard, yes? Or are you hoping that eventually you'll just be elected into power as a socialist? Because I believe that we all can agree that is nonsense. We're not going to win power through the parliamentary system, not within a bourgeoisie liberal capitalism.
I mean, that's my question, Ryan. Are you hoping to have a third party with someone more revolutionary than Corbyn, somehow more popular?
Duncan looks like he wants to answer this one.
No,
throw him under the bus.
No, of course not. There's no way that, you know, elections, the parliamentary system, whether it be in England or America or anywhere else, is designed to keep the capitalist class in power. And it's very sophisticated. It gives the illusion of choice. Of course it does. You can vote for whoever you want to every 4 or 5 years. They basically represent the same people. They're going to screw you over in the same way.
That's not true. Some of them are fascists.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, Trotskyists have got a very specific definition of fascism, but that might be something we get onto later.
Yeah.
However, the point I'm coming to is, although, you know, we don't have any faith in parliamentary democracy, nevertheless, Marx was very clear, as you know, in the 1800s, when, you know, most working class people couldn't even vote. Parliament and elections are a great way of concentrating energies of people who want to change society. We have a parliamentary system. You can vote for people. The Labour Party, for instance, was, you know, created in Britain in 1900, founded by the trade unions. After a conference in Plymouth, actually, where me and Ryan live, and Chris, or are you in Thailand now? I'm not sure. You're still
No, not yet. Soon.
Yeah, but you know, so the working class, its majority, don't automatically go over to anti-capitalist revolutionary politics. they move through kind of big organizations that are focused on the moments, the issues of the moment. So, you know, in the 1800s, it was, can we vote? Right now, it's for, can we have a decent minimum wage? Could we have a 4-day working week? To be part of these big movements is crucial, and generally these movements are expressed through the current parliamentary system. People vote for people who they feel will represent them. Bernie Sanders is, you know, not someone who I would, you know, judge as a socialist. Not a Marxist. He's not an anarchist. He doesn't want to overthrow capitalism. I mean, you know, but nevertheless,
he's a sock dem who sells himself as a democratic socialist.
Brilliant. Of course he is. But nevertheless, because he was running for the Democratic nomination, he became a focal point for young people in America, particularly young people, but a broad strata of working class Americans who thought that he represented something different, who thought that he could, you know. And so if we were to just say, okay, we're not going to bother with electoral politics, we're going to sit on the sidelines and say Bernie Sanders, he's an idiot, and you know, how are we going to convince those people? How are we going to connect?
I don't disagree with you at all.
We don't think so. Just to finish, Brenton, we don't think that we can win power by electoral means. Of course not. But by standing in elections, we can. It's a good propaganda tool, because elections is the way that people at the moment, in the situation that we're in, demonstrate their own political power. It's the way that they put forward their demands.
Strikes would be more effective.
Strikes are much more effective. Strikes are way better.
Direct action would be what I would advocate for if you actually want to change things. I believe that any concessions granted for a parliamentary system would be crumbs from a table, would be scraps thrown to alleviate. So, in fact, I would argue that any kind of parliamentary involvement, it's a way of deflating rather than inflating socialist influence.
I don't agree, Toby. I know what you mean, but the way that we work within elections, we work with them and we work against them. So say, you know, Bernie Sanders comes forward and says we have the great socialist program, he doesn't deliver on it. We say we've brought along all these people who supported Bernie Sanders. Well, he didn't do this. We were with him and we were with you who supported him. He's not doing it. We're going to carry it on. It's the same in a strike movement. Very often, you know, strikes end in failure. They end with the trade union bureaucrats capitulating to the demands of the bosses. We fight with the strikers, and strikes are always more important than electoral work at all times. But we always go with them where they are there in their strike. When the strike fails, or when that electoral campaign fails, we're then in a position to say, well, we were with you and we were with them up to this point. They've now failed. Let's carry on.
So I think what I'm hearing is essentially you guys seem to argue that there should be a mass movement with diversity of tactics, which I think is something we can all agree on. There is something that passed, though, that I don't want to leave it unchallenged. And this was, you know, the sort of universal praise we have for, you know, the early Soviets. And literally when we're saying that, we're meaning like the workers' councils, which is very, very similar to anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-communism.
Are you talking about in Russia, in the Bolshevik Revolution?
Yeah, in Russia. But, you know, when we go beyond that, what happened to the Soviets? You know, what happened at Kronstadt? And I don't want to, you know, what happened to the Black Army when it was betrayed?
We can talk about Kronstadt if you like, Brenton. We can talk about
well, my point is, I don't want to just turn this into like a tit for tat, you know, historical wrongs, because none of us were involved in any of this. But the point is, I hear a lot about the withering of the state. I have never seen the state wither. I've never seen the state come close to withering, nor do I necessarily see any situation where the state can do anything other than protect the property rights for its primary constituents.
Because it's a capitalist state. It's a state
right,
that exists in defense of private property. What else could it do? The state defends the means of production and the current ways of appropriating private property at a certain stage of historical development.
Yeah, for a particular elite class.
So to expect the capitalist state to be beneficent is like expecting water to run up.
I 100% agree with you, but the problem is that I don't think the problem is that the elite class are capitalists. I think the problem is that the elite class are elites. Whether they're capitalists, whether they're monarchists, whether they're nominally communists, they have different material working conditions and different material interests from the large masses of society.
Even if they were techno-feudalists, which seems to be the way.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I know that there has been a lot of this, maybe because I haven't read enough of these authors, maybe there is an answer for this, and I hope you can give it to me, but I do not see any mechanism by which the state is ever going to wither away, because like the whole, its job is to remain in power, to protect those property rights and to perpetuate itself. And
what if there were no property rights? There would be no property rights
if there were no state.
If there were no property rights, if the capitalistic mode of appropriation had been done away with, what would be the use of the state except to protect the
right? But again, so the property rights in each case, like if you go to the Soviet Union got stuck essentially at what Lenin called state capitalism, where the state took the place of the capitalist investor as the primary owner and property holder, and it never moved beyond that. We're seeing the same thing happen in Dengist China, where you get to a certain point with the revolution and you can't go any further, because the actual machine that you were trying to use to build socialism cannot build socialism, even if it is an ideologically socialist machine. Again, because of the structure of that social institution. The state is going to do what the state is going to do, is what it was designed for, which is to protect property on behalf of its primary constituents. And I don't see any way around that where you can leave the state in place and then expect it to just abolish itself for no reason.
I don't know. I mean, if you look at the Third Reich towards the end, that was basically falling off the wagons. I mean, that was crumbling quickly. It's not impossible for a state to implode. You just have to put some Nazis in charge. However, I just want to circle back to this core thing of, right, and so if we take power, let's say it happens, presumably through violent means, presumably through some sort of vanguardist revolution.
Ideally through casual stoner means.
Okay,
I would love to just...
Let's say...
420 campaign, right? Everyone's high as fuck. And they wake up in a haze and the government's been overthrown.
Right?
I would love that.
Right. The hippies take power, right? So we achieve a peaceful revolution and we peacefully take control of the country. Excellent. Now, what we're going to first come against is basically the organized capitalist world going against us, right? As we saw in Russia, 20 plus countries all invading. Right, we fight them off.
As you've seen everywhere, every time any revolutions happened ever. And this is my main problem with this debate, is it becomes theoretical because it always fails.
Right, and so we're going to need some sort of military force, right? We need power. We need to wield power. Power being synonymous with violence. We need to be able to wield violence, right? So we concentrate power. We see what happened in Russia. In order to successfully fight off the armies of the bourgeoisie oppressors, we organize an army that's, say, loyal to a charismatic young Trotsky. Excellent, excellent. Now, what stops the next thing from happening, i.e. a Stalin taking over that state apparatus that we created to fight off the bourgeoisie invaders?
What happened in Spain? Spain has been held up by Brenton and Toby as an example of anarchist organization. What happened in Spain is the anarchists handed over power to the bourgeoisie in Catalonia.
Whoa, no, we did not.
The frontline anarchists, the workers, the anarchists were on the front line fighting Franco, who were fantastic fighters, revolutionaries. The leadership of the anarchist movement, because the anarchist movement does have leaders, whether you like it or not, leadership and organization does arise. They, when offered power by the bourgeois government of Catalonia, refused and ended up in coalition with the capitalists. You know, so that's what happened in Spain.
Again, this was what happened in Spain, and this is really key. Was that the first? Yes, the leaders initially refused to take power within the bourgeoisie liberal government because they saw continuing the revolution as the better way towards getting what they actually wanted, as opposed to taking the reins of the state. Now, this made sense. The anarchists were the primary fighting force. They were the ones who had defeated fascism, but the problem was they were isolated. The Franco's forces had the full force of Germany and Italy behind them. They had the Italian legionnaires. They had the German Condor Legion. They had support from Shell and Texaco, fronting Franco all of the oil that he needed to drive his war machine. And there was the anarchists, while they had captured the North, there was no war industry in the North. So they had small arms, mainly left over from World War I, no cannons, no airplane, nothing, and no allies within the world to provide them with these kinds of things. They continued the fight, and they still, against enormous odds, stopped the fascists in the North, held the line. Then the USSR got involved and the liberal government came in. The USSR suppressed the anarchist revolution, rolled back private property rights, and then promptly lost the war to Franco because nobody wanted to fight anymore because they weren't fighting for anything new. It honestly reminded me of a very large and very violent version of what happened in 2016 with Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and Trump. Bernie Sanders, we can see him as the stand-in for the anarchists, the revolutionaries. We can see Hillary Clinton as a stand-in for Stalin, as a stand-in for the role that the USSR played in reestablishing private property rights and rolling back the revolution. And by the way, this was done violently. You read the May Days, and we should agree on this because the anarchists and the Trotskyists were the ones getting attacked by the Republic and especially by the Stalinists. So yeah, this was rolled back violently. And then when, there was nothing left to fight for but more of the same, the fascists won because of course they did, in much the same way that Trump won, because of course he did, because, Hillary was running on the slogan of America is already great. Like, you got to give people something to fight for, not something to fight against if you want to actually succeed in a revolutionary struggle. So yeah, what happened in Spain was fascinating, but I don't think it's an indictment of anarchism, and I don't think it would have changed anything if the higher-ups in the CNT had taken government positions early on, because the liberal nations preferred the fascists to them. The only ally who was helping them was Stalin and Mexico. Mexico's awesome, by the way, huge props to Mexico. But yeah, I don't see that outcome changing in any way if a different course by the leaders of the CNT-FI had been taken. The only way I could possibly see this is, and I don't see them actually doing this, is if instead of waiting at Saragossa, instead of listening to all of the contemporary advice coming from the generals that had remained loyal to the Republic, if the anarchists had gone 100% on the attack and just blitzed them. That's really the only chance, because then maybe you can capture the war industry in the South. But the only way I think anyone would even think that would be a good strategy is if they had, knowledge of the future, which they don't.
That knowledge of the future is what Trotsky had. And he wrote on the Spanish Revolution a year before the CNT were offered power in Catalonia. He said the CNT and the PAUM have to go into coalition. They have to mobilize the workers, institute conscription in Catalonia, and mobilize all of the forces of northern Spain against Franco. They didn't.
I mean,
they said they're not going to touch bourgeois power. We won't have anything to do with it. And as you said, the Stalinists came in. They
So instituting conscription wouldn't have done anything because they didn't have the weapons. So like you can't
there's ways and means, comrade. There's ways and means.
No, there's not. If you don't have war industry and you don't have anyone who will sell you weapons, like
ammonia. I mean, just explosives, IEDs. I don't know.
They were good at that.
The problem is, of course, that this Spanish example it's a failure. It's a failure for anarchism, and it's an indictment that if we can't survive a little bit of a betrayal and a superior fascist enemy, then what hope is there to create some sort of anarchist society in the future, unless we go down some sort of vanguardist socialist route?
I mean, I'll give you two great examples. One would be the Zapatistas in Chiapas, and the other, which I think is a bit better than the Zapatistas since they're not actively involved in the war zone, would be the PKK-YPG. You know, they did manage to not only defeat the fascists, but hold their territory. And, you know, even after Trump betrayed them like an idiot, you know, they're still holding on. So,
and yet they were rolled over by the Turkish army when the Turkish army invaded.
Yeah, I mean, that's like saying that Afghanistan was rolled over by the American army. I mean,
you know, if the PKK had and the YPG had instituted,
sorry, can I just get an acronym
of course.
check on who they are? Sorry.
Oh, these are the Kurdish anarchist fighters in Syria.
Yes.
No, not in Syria. I don't
Kurdistan, but yes.
Yeah. I don't
Northern
know
Syria and Iraq.
So in northeastern Syria, the state of Rojava, a independent workers' state run upon anarchist lines based on the work of an American anarchist called Murray Bookchin, whose work is very closely followed by the revolutionaries in northeastern Syria. They have created a fantastic society, a non-sectarian, Arabs, Kurds, Syrians, they all muddle along together. They've created a diamond in a sea of mud in an area of the world which is run over by religious and sectarian ethnic divisions. They created a workers' state, and they were on the front line against ISIS. The Americans supported them as the rope supports the hanging man. The moment that the PKK went against the interests of American globalization, Trump dumped them.
Hang on. That's not entirely correct. Trump didn't dump them for strategic reasons. Trump dumped them because he's an idiot, and the what was it?
He liked
Erdogan,
the Turkish strongman.
Yeah. Erdogan, who was just a stand-in for Trump's daddy, said, "Hey, can you please pull your American troops back?" And
but that's rather the point, isn't it? Trump and Erdogan and Turkey are part of the international capitalist system, right? They supported the PKK, the Kurdish Revolutionary Army, and the YPG, the International Brigade of Kurdistan, as long as they were fighting the American globalist imperialist enemy, which was ISIS, who wanted to create a kind of medieval barbaric state stretching from Spain to the Philippines. You know, that's not in favor. That's not in favor of American imperialism. But when they were dropped and when Turkey invaded, they were rolled over. The northwest of Syria, which the Kurds had controlled. You know, Kobani, the city in which they defended against ISIS. Many YPG Kurdish fighters died defending that against ISIS. The Turks, when they invaded, just rolled through, and it was because fundamentally the PKK's way of organization was anarchistic. It was localized. If you want to move,
I don't agree.
Hang on a minute. It was if you want to station your troops, if you want to billet our troops in our village, all of our village has got to have a vote. Every single person has got to decide whether or not we're allowed to station troops in this village. If you want to mine this area of the country, everyone's got.
So do you think the problem was that because a village had to vote on whether or not they want, like, could they have stopped the Turks if there had been no choice?
Yes.
No, they don't have the weapons.
Look, Trotsky and the Russian revolutionaries, after the First World War and after the worst civil war in history, where 8 million people died, managed to fight off 21 invading imperialist armies on the basis of a population that was starving
in Russia in winter,
and the Ukrainian Black Army.
Because they had centralized control, they had leadership, they had
they would have lost without the Black Army. Like literally without Nestor Makhno and his final cavalry charge.
Nestor Makhno was raiding trains that were going to St. Petersburg. He was stealing grain that were headed to the cities.
I don't have, so first off, that doesn't matter. What matters is that he's the one who is most responsible for saving the revolution. Specifically, if he had not well, we got to walk away. If he had not destroyed the White Army, like they would have taken Petrograd, and there most likely would not have been a USSR, period. So you can't claim that anarchist tactics and I suppose strategies aren't effective. The problem isn't the organization strategies. The problem is access to war industry. Like, again, like the PKK-YPG, yeah, of course they're going to get rolled over by an attack from the Turks. The Turks are a much larger, much more powerful state with access to weapons well beyond what the PKK-YPG have access to. And yeah, that's going to happen. But also we have seen large technological enemies that initially roll over a civilization get eventually crushed. And a good example of this is the US in Afghanistan, where obviously we have all of the power that we need to defeat the Taliban in the open. We've done it time and time again, but ultimately you hang on to that fight and you keep going. The empire won't be able to, if they can't destroy you, they eventually will not be able to prevent you from retaking control of your territory. And I think you'll see a very similar situation with the PKK, YPG, and Turkey as this conflict continues.
I was just going to come back on a few points from earlier. So sorry for backtracking. I also want to take another moment just to enjoy Chris being spoon-fed there. It's quite entertaining for me. Do we all get the same? Can we have some of that come our way? But no, go back on some of the points from earlier. I think Toby was raising the question of, can things ever be done sort of peaceably? Can we kind of elect our way to socialism? And I think, like I said earlier, we recognize the limitations of bourgeois democracy. However, when we contest elections, we don't do it just to go, we want to stand in parliament and go, well, that's it, we're slowly achieving. Obviously, it's through the organization, encouragement of workers to take strike action, to occupy, to recognize the power they wield as a class. That's what will ultimately transform society. However, we don't stand in elections simply on a propaganda basis. When we've been elected into positions, if we take our organization were elected, we had the majority of the Liverpool City Council in the 1980s, for instance. We didn't just sit on our laurels and go, right, we've been elected, now we'll just sort of sell copies of the Socialist on the street corners until one day the revolution will come. We took on the Thatcher government. We wrestled £60 million out of the coffers of the Treasury at a time, much like now, where they were determined to inflict austerity on people. And so, whilst I recognise we're not, it's not simply going to be the case that one day we'll just elect our way into position. Although, it's not wholly ruled out that might be a situation that happens. The point is, though, is that obviously we saw, even with the limited program of Corbyn in Britain, and indeed with Bernie Sanders in the US, anything that even remotely kind of moves in that direction is such a threat to the capitalist class. It whets the appetite of the workers to want more and to go much further than the likes of Bernie Sanders or Jeremy Corbyn would be willing to go. But in seeing the reaction,
we had, by the way, in the US, I don't know if you guys knew, we had news anchors going off, certain that they would be executed in like Maoist, Maoist show trials in Central Park if Bernie Sanders was elected.
Yeah, no, I could fully imagine. We
in Britain, we had the army were using Jeremy Corbyn's face for target practice. A senior ranking general said, if that guy gets anywhere near number 10 Downing Street, there will be a military coup against him.
Oh, wow.
They're not joking. This is the point. They are not.
Your military is worse than. Oh my God!
Well,
your military is worse than ours. If they're actually doing
don't forget the redcoats. But the thing is when we saw even the limited program of Corbynism in Britain on the table, the threat wasn't necessarily Corbyn himself. It was the danger that it would bring behind it a resurgent working class that for 40 years has had to swallow neoliberalist politics. And you then start to see the mask of capitalism really slip. You see the governor of the Bank of England, for instance, threatening that there'll be capital strike. You'll see the mass exodus of capital from Britain, to try and starve out the workforce. And it's in recognizing that, in trying to put forwards our position in an electoral circumstance, part of the process of that is to use those positions to get what we can, recognizing the limitations of that system. But at the same time, even when we look at the example, for instance, of the Liverpool City Council, we were able to do in one small council a huge amount. We built 5,000 new council homes. We saw the Thatcher government given a bloody nose on a number of occasions. We use those positions to kind of put forward our platform, not just in words but also in action. And obviously a small a council is only going to be able to achieve so much. The point is that you take that out further. But in doing that, the councillors, for instance, would approach the trade unions, would approach the community groups, and basically say, we're just a group of councillors. We're not going to do this on our own. And so, in the example of Liverpool, at one point you had the Thatcher government threatening to bring the commissioners in because they were putting forward, in their eyes, an illegal no cuts budget. And so, the councillors raised the battalions of the working class. You actually saw the Liverpool the entire city of Liverpool come out on strike in support of that council, and in defence of those. And then essentially you had those councillors in a position to say, well, feel free to send those commissioners in if you can get them in, because there were 50,000 angry Liverpudlians that were willing to defend these councillors who were engaging in the bourgeois democratic system, but showing what can be achieved even in that limited sense. And obviously, therefore, for us, it's important that we engage in elections to show we are a credible and serious force that working class people can take seriously. You can vote for us as a party, but we don't just use those positions to then line our own pockets, or certainly through pledging to take the average worker's wage. You're actively stopping that process. But by using,
I wouldn't say stopping, but you're slowing it.
No. I take that point. But
where does the Overton window sit right now? Is a Socialist Party going to take power in UK anytime soon?
So can I address
Or are you completely in the grasp of a Tory government that's probably going to reign until the death of Boris Johnson?
Let me make it clear. We live in a one-party state. To be clear, most of Corbyn's most controversial policies were asking for things that were already enacted in Germany. So if you look at his idea of putting workers on the board of successful manufacturing companies, big thing in Germany. If you're unsure who's winning in the manufacturing wars, Britain or Germany, it's Germany. It's been proven to be very successful time and time again. So this wasn't some far lefty destroy the economy policy. Very simply, Corbyn was asking for a basic thing that had been proven to be successful in Germany. Duncan, you're eager to jump in.
Many of Corbyn's policies, which were derided by the Tories, the Conservative Party that is, 2 years ago, is absolutely beyond the pale, radical socialist. They've had to institute themselves in the course of the COVID pandemic. So one thing he said was, free laptops to kids. If you're a kid in school and you don't have access to a laptop because your parents can't afford one, the state should provide you with one. The Conservatives say this is absolutely outrageous. This is, how are we going to ever to afford this? The COVID pandemic comes along. Everyone's home learning. Okay, everyone's got to have a free laptop.
I mean, co-opting leftist policies and then taking the credit for it is a very successful right-wing tactic.
Yeah, I mean, with COVID in the United States, we basically this was through unemployment, so it didn't go to everybody, but we essentially had a UBI for most of the country for a while, and it worked out great. And
the right keeps co-opting these policies better than the left does, who are so beholden to their corporate donors. So they don't have
the right aren't in any more control over the state of capitalism at this moment or that moment than the left are. They're blowing away in the wind like everyone is.
By the way,
we had to nationalize the wages, for God's sake. In the COVID pandemic, the wages of 70% of the population were nationalized. The state had to pay people money for staying at home and not doing any work.
Look, I love saying this, and I don't believe that there are any capitalists still listening in at this point. Pretty sure
they're very uncomfortable.
Just writing a very, very long comment.
Let me just say that Corbyn's second policy, which was fucking outrageous, nationalising some industries which clearly don't.
Are we allowed to swear? Sorry, I didn't realise we were allowed to swear.
Duncan! No wonder you've been so quiet. No, Duncan, please. Anyway, let me finish my point. Corbyn's second policy, which was outrageous at the time, and it would ruin industry, was the idea of nationalising things like water and energy. And to anyone that thinks that that's a stupid idea that will revert us to Eastern European standards of living, it works so well in countries like France, where you have this hybrid of nationalisation, that they're able to buy up our companies, and in England they're free from all of the regulations that stop them fucking over the end consumer back home. So we just get the worst of both worlds.
So this is something that I'm going to bring up so this is what I'm going to bring up for Chris, because I find this very, very interesting. We talked about the reaction. You've got a guy in the military apparently threatening a coup, like in the event of Jeremy Corbyn getting elected. You've got in the United States, we've got major media figures completely losing their minds over Bernie Sanders, and these very, very mild sockdems are being treated as if they're the big scary socialists, like the four of us who are talking about this.
Let's give everyone AK-47s. That will solve a lot of problems.
I have proposed.
Brent has
something
a very
similar.
good point. So Brent, I think here's the point. Is often said, I didn't leave the center left to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I remember 20 years ago. I wouldn't say I was centrist 20 years ago, but my point is, I don't know, maybe I was naive, maybe I was ignorant, but at this point, we're talking about why aren't the British Navy shooting dinghies in the sea to stop these refugees coming here? The level of debate, it has deteriorated so fiercely, and I don't know, maybe I wasn't paying attention before, but I used to think that the right had a point to make. But late stage capitalism just stops.
It's a hell of a drug.
If someone has a fourth home, it's like a buffet, right? I just believe in basic Christian principles of if that person's dying, then maybe that person needs to be a bit less rich.
Yeah. I'm 1,000% with you on that.
Apparently, like you say, I find myself more agreeing with you radicals than anyone else in the political sphere.
Yeah, and I think part of this is, sort of, you brought up the Overton window. This is kind of, I don't know if it's the same in England, but, as a result of the Red Scare, the left was totally purged and destroyed in the United States. And as a result, we didn't have an actual radical left criticism within the popular consciousness for decades. And so we, the furthest left anything had ever gone in the United States was Occupy Wall Street. You know, and the conservative reaction to that was completely out of bounds. Now, I would actually argue that the you know, hardcore conservative reaction was more like the reason why the Republicans are mostly fascists now is because of how successful Clintonite neoliberalism was, where you denounced radical Republicans while co-opting their economic ideas. And I think that, so to distinguish themselves and to beat that strategy from the Clintons, they just lost their minds completely. But at the same time, you know, American politics is an eagle with two right wings at this point. And not only is it two right wings, but it's like starting to list as a result of one wing just being way longer than the other. So it seems like that may also be what's happening in England, because like, what was it that they had with Corbyn, where they had the trot hunting, which is hilarious because we've got two trots here. And they were doing their best to oust Corbyn, essentially, you know, the centrists with Red Scare and identity politics were able to oust Corbyn, while the actual people they were supposedly looking for, not the racists, but the trots, weren't for the most part involved in this. So I think what's important for the Overton window really is to actually make the radical left a part of the conversation, at least. I mean, if nothing else, you know, whether it's through, you know, direct action or the media or culture jamming or whatever, if people don't hear what we have to say, they're not going to be able to accurately judge what is a left and what is a right-wing position. And as a result, the center is going to you know, careen to the right.
Duncan's been waiting patiently. I'll just say quickly that I think that our best hope of making that dialogue is to split the Labour Party hard. And at the moment, the Labour are losing.
I like how you say that.
Labour are losing, and the conversation around it is because Corbyn. Like that's all there is. I want to drive, like, and I don't know if this is possible.
Wait, Chris, are you also anti-Semitic?
Well, I recently found out that Marx is Jewish, and yeah, I have conflicted feelings about that as a Corbynista in the Labour Party.
Trotsky as well.
Well, he was Jewish or anti-Semitic?
Both.
Possibly.
Anyway, Duncan, over to you.
About the Overton window, I think it's absolute bullshit. I don't think you can possibly try to encompass the various tendencies that people are split up into and the opinions that they have into some kind of firm frame, some kind of category. So, you know, today, me and Ryan were out in the most working class area of Plymouth, the city where we live. It's a Navy city, very working class city. We were doing a stall where we have a little table and we have our paper and we're calling for a £15 an hour minimum wage and all the rest of it. And we had a guy come up to us and he said, "I'm a Tory. I don't believe in a word you're saying. I don't agree with you." And I said, "Well, what about a £15 an hour minimum wage? What about a 4-day working week? What do you think about that?" And he said, "Oh, that sounds pretty good, actually. I'll buy one of your papers." And we had a good conversation. So this concept that, you know, the political spectrum is encapsulated by some sort of discrete, hard, you know, graphical thing that moves this and that way is much too formal. You know, people have conflicting and disordered ideas about what kind of society they want to live in and what they want from their politicians. So, you know, Joe Biden won the election in America off the back of Trump's complete incompetence in the face of the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, he almost lost. He
almost lost. He only just won because working class Americans. What do you want to say, Chris?
Had they picked Bernie, I think it would have been a much larger.
I think so.
And they only
didn't pick Bernie
to win by a narrow majority because of their corporate sponsors.
And they only didn't pick Bernie because the Democratic nomination was stitched up, just like it was in 2016, right? Mm-hmm. But Biden's popularity is now at the lowest level of any president in American history, or at least it has dropped at the lowest level, even more than Trump.
Oh, wow.
Biden has not solved any of the problems that gave rise to the election of Donald Trump.
But the good news is that he's not going to be aware of it because he's not going to remember it. So,
well, yeah, at least he won't know. Good for him, you know. But so I don't know. I think this idea of the Overton window is too crude. You know,
what I meant was that you have the material conditions in the UK, and I'm not in the UK at the moment, but I speak to people who still live there. The material conditions are deteriorating rapidly, but it has been for almost a decade. I mean,
no. It has been getting worse, slowly crumbling. The last year, we've gone from. I don't know if you guys know, but there's literally the waiting list of emergency rooms has just 10x in the last month. We have ambulances stalling in car parks outside of hospitals, and nurses trying to treat people in ambulances in car parks. We're not sure right now whether we're going to have heating for winter.
There's shortages
food
of
for Christmas.
The supermarket shelves are empty. You know,
you can blame Brexit and COVID, but actually, it's worse than both of those things anyone ever predicted would fuck up the
I left the UK in 2012 because I realized things were going to hell in a handbasket back then, right? Things haven't improved since 2012. Things have markedly gone a lot worse.
Where are you from, Toby?
Yet, I'm Swedish. I'm from Sweden. Yeah, but I used to live in Bristol.
Lucky bastard.
I was in Bristol for many years. I studied at Canterbury with Chris here.
Anyway. Bristol has got worse, by the way.
Bristol, don't say that. That's my favorite town.
Have you guys ever seen Nathan Barley? Bristol is just a bunch of people in scooters. Like literally, I'm talking. You stop at a red light, and there's just 80 people on a scooter, zooming past the red light, crashing into each other. Half of them are delivery drivers. Half of them are students high off their tits. Everyone's crashing into one another.
You said it
down
worse.
on Colston statue, though.
Yeah, exactly.
At least they've got that going for them.
I have hope for my adoptive hometown. Anyway. My argument is still that things are getting so much worse, yet there is no viable alternative to Boris What's-His-Face.
Okay.
Boris Johnson, which I think is an indication, and this is something that the Trots can probably agree with me on. I think the answer here really is dual power. Like, we need to be building our own institutions to take the place of the ones that are offered by capitalism and the state. Like,
Brian,
we need to arm the immigrants. But anyway,
I'm fine with that.
I wanted to come on a few points, so bear with me a sec. I wanted to pick up on something Chris said earlier, and I think he raised the prospect of sometimes that these discussions kind of degenerate into kind of looking at different historical examples and going into kind of almost theoretical territory, and I wanted to raise that as a point because we haven't yet seen either a socialist or an anarchic society come forward, or at least come forward in a way that's been long-lasting and successful. But that doesn't mean to say it won't happen. It's simply the capitalism hasn't been overthrown in the way that it needs to be, which is it's a global system. It needs to be overthrown globally. It's not going to happen by achieving it. And obviously I won't go into the Stalinistic idea of socialism in one country and what that then meant in terms of him trying to defend his own position, and therefore that dictating organizing in a way which sort of undermined, for instance, the Spanish revolution in the 1930s. I won't go back into that discussion because we're already past that now, but I wanted to raise that part of the reason we do go into these kind of discussions is because it's important that we learn from history, learn both the mistakes and learn the lessons from those historical examples, so that we don't make those similar mistakes again. And I think what is clear is that although we haven't seen yet a lasting change in a socialistic sense or indeed an anarchistic sense, the the overriding message is that capitalism is abundantly failing. Whereas, in the time where it was coming to prominence, it did play a progressive role in society, even if it came, with blood seeping out of every pore. Now we're in a situation where, within the next 10 years, we could face going over a cliff edge of climate catastrophe because of the way in which we're destructively using our resources. We're seeing now that capitalist oligarchs are an absolute fetter, rather than still trying to increase the productivity of the means of production. We're seeing now just big businesses with they're essentially like dragons hoarding wealth, and doing nothing with it. They're not investing it, and so even some capitalistic thinkers are kind of moving in a sort of Keynesian direction, saying that we need to start tapping into feeding into the bottom so that it can
modern monetary theory.
Indeed.
Which we should talk about briefly. But Ryan, so to summarize, what you're saying is things are about to get so dire that the left might finally unite.
I'm getting there. But I think one of the things that's different now to say when we look at the period of the Russian Revolution or Spain or Cuba, for instance, because of the need for capitalism to constantly revolutionize the productive forces to find new markets, we are now in a much more integrated world. Technique is far more advanced. One of the failures, for instance, of the Russian Revolution is that effectively they were trying to achieve socialism in what was still largely a feudal country, and one of the failings is the revolution didn't spread to Germany, which was a much more developed capitalistic economy, which would have been able to support the population much better had it been successful there. But we're now in a situation where productive forces have moved on a great deal since then, and I think we've seen through various examples. I mean, the Occupy movement is while that was happening, you also had the Arab Spring, where you saw a wave of revolutionary movements spread throughout, like places like Tunisia and North Africa, and the possibilities that exist now for revolutions to not only be successful but to spread internationally as they need to in order to overthrow capitalism internationally, I think are much greater. But I think the thing, which is the point I was getting to from the discussion we've just been having, is that I think one of the things we desperately lack at the moment, and that is something that is slowly starting to come about, and I think the expression of it in things like Corbynism, in Bernie Sanders, and in things like Podemos and so on, is that there is currently a lack of mass working class parties. Whereas you had, for instance, in the early 1900s, the Labour Party, which, although it had a bourgeois leadership, did have elements of working class organization, and workers were able to implement policies. We don't, after the collapse of Stalinism, which was a bureaucratic state, it showed that there was an alternative, i.e. a planned economy. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had the triumphalism of like Francis Fukuyama sort of proclaiming this is the end of history, capitalism won, we did it. We're now at a point where it's so clearly obvious to the majority of people that capitalism isn't working for the majority of people. But the one thing we don't yet have are mass organizations that give expression to ordinary working class people. And I think we're coming to a point where things are coalescing, and obviously things don't happen in a straight line. We're seeing, just as we're seeing the coming together of different leftist movements, and we're seeing the strengthening of leftist organizations here in Britain, for instance. We're seeing as we speak, we've had the Bakers Union and now the Communication Workers Union sort of distancing itself from the Labour Party, and then the question flows from that, well, if you're distancing yourself from this party, surely a new party is what's needed. And there are, in every country there's grasps towards that, but similarly there are moves to the right as well. We're seeing the formation of far right parties. We're seeing the likes of the the right populism we've seen with like Bolsonaro, with Trump, with Boris Johnson, who are recognizing that you can't simply represent the establishment, and so they're kind of taking this populist line because it's the one way they can almost keep their power, keep influencing, and like Trump trying to pose as this sort of anti-establishment figure whilst being a billionaire himself. This is something that that will only be overcome if we start to see the formation of mass working class party that give an authority to the workers movement and start to push in the direction that is sorely needed. And I think that certainly isn't something that we just decree and so it will be. Obviously we're making huge steps towards that, but I think in terms of where we are at the moment, there is an argument that can be made that if things get worse, then it will sort of whip people into realizing that something needs to change. Actually, sometimes things need to get a little better for people to actually have the confidence to fight, because when
you're 100% right about that. If you look at the history of revolutions and successful revolutions, it's never been things go from bad to worse. That just breaks people's spirit. It's things are bad, they get better for a little bit, and then there is a sharp economic downturn. That's almost the story on every single successful revolution in human history.
Yeah, and I think with the situation as it is at the moment, we're coming into another capitalist period of crisis. We had the 2007 and 8 crash, which was one of the biggest crashes up to this point. We are going into potentially worse crashes now as well. We saw for instance in Britain the worst recession in over 300 years, effectively, with the COVID pandemic. The pandemic itself is kind of bringing to the surface all those contradictions of capitalism that can't any longer be hidden. And I think whilst that for most people objectively the situation is getting worse, I think it's also people are realizing that something needs to be done, but also in a roundabout way some of these contradictions are also highlighting workers' power. We saw through the announcement of who the key workers are. Funnily enough, it's not the hedge funds managers, it's not the bankers, it's care workers, it's NHS hospital staff, it's teachers, and so on. And so that
were
already
you guys sorry on Tuesdays we were clapping hedge fund managers? Did you guys miss that?
Bugger.
Turns out it is the entrepreneurs who generate value, not actually the laborers. Also, can I just add a correction there? You started by saying that the billionaires aren't investing in anything. I mean, that is patently a lie. They're building rocket ships to send themselves out into space and armed compounds to wear out the storm.
We'll qualify that.
So,
they're not investing productively. Okay.
Yeah.
Just add that.
What's unproductive with an armed
anyone other
compound?
than themselves?
Yes, sorry, I forgot. I should have given praise to Jeff Bezos' penis.
However, did the whole space thing? I
to
believe
be
it's
fair,
a
Jeff Bezos got a lot of people talking about his penis. Mission accomplished.
And that's why anyone becomes a capitalist.
However, the space thing is bullshit, freaking performance art. The fact that no one's really talking about the bunkers they're building, the armed compounds they're building. It's like, oh yeah, no, they are aware of what's coming. They are aware of what's happening to the planet. They are aware their complicity. They're also aware that they're sitting on all the resources needed to survive the coming fucking Armageddon.
And I think, the situation we're currently in with the pandemic churning up consciousness is one in which, we can draw a lot of confidence. I think in Britain, for instance, with the bottlenecking of certain industries, we're seeing, for instance, a mass shortage of HGV drivers. And through that, their wages are exploding right now because, people are desperately trying to ship their goods. And so obviously that objectively strengthens the working class in these areas. But then it's also aggravating further issues like, for instance, bus drivers going, well, why the hell would I continue driving the bus on a crap wage when I can be a HGV driver? And so you're seeing that shift.
Why would I drive an ambulance when
Yeah.
the
And
HGV
so,
driver license
you know,
just tripled.
these things that are happening are obviously, you know, starting to churn up consciousness, and people are starting to recognize more clearly the class lines that are being drawn up, which, you know, we should take confidence from. But, you know, the warning comes then that, you know, we can't therefore just take it in our stride that, oh, well, if we just kind of carry on as we're going, you know, eventually people all join a revolutionary party like ours, and we'll have socialism. You know, as I said, there are those that are also drawing different conclusions. There are those trying to organize, for instance, the boats that go out and sink migrant and refugee boats, trying to escape the conflicts that we're helping to arm and fund and you know, inflict. And so, you know, it's vital for us to put
They're
forward,
called fascists.
But there are also those who are organising, anarchists who are organising into International Workers Association, and others, those who've seen the crisis of capitalism, which is obvious to everybody, but are drawing different conclusions. I think, you know, fundamentally, the argument between Marxism and anarchism is not going to be solved in this debate or in any debate. It'll be solved in practice, you know. That's not to say that the last two hours has been pointless, comrades and friends.
But
you know,
let me reiterate, it's not a debate. Like, as we've said, I don't think we're strategically allied on any of the major points.
It's not a debate, he says, and then puts two Trotskyists together with two anarchists.
I think we're all reaching for the same goal, right?
The argument here seems to be, because I do think we are all reaching for the same goal. The argument seems to be at this point, or not the argument, but the thrust of the conversation is that we need a mass movement. We need a mass leftist movement that can encapsulate, you know, the various tendencies and groups within the working class to wield actual power against capital and against the state. And I think that, yeah, that's exactly what we need. I think that, you know, it was interesting that you guys kept bringing up elections. I think you might have assumed that as an anarchist, I might be against Democratic. I'm not. I'm not against voting.
I don't assume anything of the sort. You know, I'm currently doing this meeting from the house of a good friend who's an anarchist who stood in elections, you know, in May for our, you know, an anti-austerity, anti-capitalist movement which we're part of. And, you know, anarchism. This is the problem with debating anarchists: is none of them agree upon what anarchism is. It's such a broad, amorphous. Whenever you say,
like
well, anarchism is this, you've got some anarchists saying, well, this guy doesn't understand what anarchism is. This is not what I think anarchism is. You know, it is. You know, it's not cohesive.
Duncan, get some finger wagging in there.
but the point is that but here's the point. So we all have different ideas, different temperaments, and different historical and philosophical tendencies that we are interested in. If the goal, however, is to build socialism, to overthrow capitalism, to defeat these reactionary forces, we have to find a way to work with each other, and we also have to find a way to work with and communicate with the broad masses of society. And I think in the way that we do that is via a mass movement. You know, and I think that it will probably express itself within unions, within direct action, and within electoral politics. The big problem here is at least at this point, this mass movement has not coalesced. There's been attempts, and unfortunately, those attempts were defeated. So, you know, I guess my question to everyone else is what comes next? How do we build socialism? How do we build this broad coalition? Because, you know, if we don't, we're going to get fascism, I think. You know, as the working class, or I'm sorry, as the ruling class loses faith in capitalism's ability to maintain its privileges, the new society can break along class lines, or the new society can break along ethno-nationalist lines. And it seems right now with Bolsonaro and Trump and QAnon at this point that we are going to find ourselves faced with actual militant fascists very, very soon.
I think you guys will have a civil war before that happens. Don't worry about that.
Okay, great.
So can I start there before we open up? I believe that the lesser of two evils in politics only gets you so far, and politics itself only gets you so far. And I am a nerd for political debate, which is why I consider you all my good friends. No offense. I think politics needs to happen more than once every 4 years.
Yes.
And I'm starting to come around to the theory that community is more important than politics. If you have a really good idea, but not a bunch of people who are listening to it,
Doesn't
what
matter.
the fuck
Yeah.
is it worth, right? Like, and so I think every soup kitchen you attend, every garden you plant, every person you're kind to, like, I'm starting to think that that is how you grow movement. And it's not the be all and end all, but
No, I think
God,
you might be
at
right.
least it's something that makes me feel better. And honestly, tilting against the windmills of the establishment is pretty fucking depressing. So at least that kind of gets a community of people on the same page, engaged. And I think when you actually do something, as we've had in this conversation, the minutiae of the details of who's your favorite historical like hero is kind of like top trumps. It's
Buenaventura Durruti, by the way. But...
there you go. Yeah, and you should buy his animated comic of Buenaventura Durruti, available on Kickstarter. But God bless capitalism. But
Kickstarter's unionized. In fact, the day that I launched my very first Kickstarter was the day Kickstarter unionized.
Good man.
I think
I agree.
One of the,
do you want to go on, Ryan? Okay.
Sorry, Duncan. I think one of the things about this current historical period that we're going through is that, unlike the period, for instance, of the 30s or the 80s, where you saw mass working class action, I think at the moment, the majority of the working class has largely been passive. We've seen, we've gone through a historic period of defeats. In Britain, it was Thatcherism. In the US, it was Reagan, and largely, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to the collapse of Stalinism, which, despite all of its many shortcomings, did show that there was at least another, there was an alternative. You can plan an economy, for instance. We don't just have to organize through capitalism. It showed a different model was possible, even if it was one-sided. But I think at this current point in time, I think it's easy to almost fall into a pit of despair and think, well, is this how it's going to always be? But I think, certainly in Britain, but also in the US and in many countries, you're seeing that the bourgeois have no control of their system at the moment. It's completely running amok. And so, Boris Johnson, for instance, was certainly not the first choice of the capitalist class in Britain, but he was needed because he was the only one that would probably face off Corbynism. And similarly, I think, in the US, Biden's been elected, but I think with the lack of an alternative he's going to offer, he's essentially going to play the safe pair of hands for capitalism over the next 4 years. You could very well see
as an alternative to Bernieism. I'll just quickly pick up on that. I think it's amazing that the establishment, as terrible as they thought Brexit was as an idea, and I've come round to this idea, and I think it's true. I heard a senior conservative advisor consultant say this, is that Brexit was the necessary evil alternative to Jeremy Corbyn, and that is why the establishment got together around Brexit, because the alternative was Corbyn.
But Corbyn was pro-Brexit.
Yes, this is what I love, is that Corbyn could have won had his consultants not interfered. And he come out as
that's the irony of it.
The same with the Greek economist
Yanis Varoufakis.
Yeah, Varoufakis. Right. Had he come out against the austerity IMF-led,
he would have won.
EU,
we wouldn't have
won. He would have been a genuine Brexit person. We would have had Corbyn leading. Anyway, I digress. Sorry, Ryan.
No. That's fine. But I think,
as Hegel said, necessity expresses itself through accident.
the lack of an alternative, in fact, the more safe pair of hands for capitalism that Biden will be, could very well see a Trump government in 2024, or a
Horrifying,
successor,
but very likely.
a successor to Trump, because people are desperately looking for alternative. And I think we're at a stage historically where at the moment the working class hasn't taken the center stage of history at this point in time. But I think with the churning up of consciousness through the pandemic, through all of the economic convulsions that are currently taking place the world over, and let's not forget, some of the smallest ripples can create huge avalanches. The price of oil, for instance, there are some economies, take like, for instance, Venezuela, or I think it's Nigeria, are so reliant on oil production that when the price bottoms out, like through the pandemic, it is absolutely disastrous for the economy. And similarly, the bottlenecking we're seeing in various sectors of industry is creating huge problems. We're now facing the prospect of huge inflation as well, where food and fuel prices are skyrocketing. This is going to further aggravate the situation. But at the moment, we don't yet have the working class taking center stage. But I think whereas we've gone through a historical period where that has been the case, and we've seen all the defeats that have gone on, we're now reaching a point where I think we are going to see more of these class battles erupt onto the scene. And in Britain, for instance, we're seeing the HGV drivers have already started pushing for better conditions. We're seeing the health workers who've delivered, despite the immense cutbacks and setbacks that they've had, they've delivered us largely through a pandemic, and then been given crap wage remuneration for it. I think we're going to start seeing more broad national strike actions take place, and we'll start to see the coalescing of all these different trends that have been building up in society over a period of time. And I think whilst it's easy in this period to kind of be a bit of a doomsayer and look at things with a gloomy prospect, I think with the potential class battles that will erupt into the center stage of history at this conjunction of time, I think we could very well see huge shifts in politics in the next few years. And so I think even the smaller things, like for instance the unions starting to move away from Labour in Britain, they're not a small thing. And similarly, although our co-thinkers in the US were very they gave critical support to Bernie Sanders, making clear all the issues of and all the shortcomings of his program. The fact that he then came behind the Democrats and rejected the idea that actually if he broke from the Democratic Party and formed a new Workers' Party in the US, that could have fundamentally transformed the situation and certainly cut across Trumpism. I think we're getting to that point now where we're going to see more of these monumental movements starting to take place. We will see more. We're seeing. It doesn't matter where you look in society at the moment. Most countries, the establishment, the parties that have usually been the ones representing the establishment are collapsing because people are looking for alternatives. Here in Britain, you're seeing the hollowing out of both Labour and the Tories. The biggest vote is for no party. It's the people that stay at home at this stage. And I think, when we look at France, for instance, the Parti Socialiste was wiped out, and we've seen like France Insoumise and Macron come out of nowhere because all of the main parties that represent kind of the establishment and capitalism are collapsing. And now we're reaching a point where people are looking for all those alternatives. And at this stage, the workers' movement hasn't authoritatively put a stamp on new organizations and started to see the coalescence of a left around new formations, although there are certainly attempts at it. And if we take the example of Greece, for instance, you're seeing the very quick coming to power of groups like Syriza, but then they're tested very quickly because they can't offer a limited reformist program. In the case of Greece, they had the option of either breaking with capitalism, the EU, and having to go far further than they were prepared to, or doing what they did, which was to completely bend the knee. Unfortunately, that has gone down as a historic defeat now. But I think we're going to see more of these monumental earthquakes taking place in the near future. And so I very much have an optimistic view of the future. And I think especially with the climate catastrophe that is looming on the agenda, it's almost kind of adding a pressure cooker element in, where people are like, well, if we don't do something imminently, then we are just going to sleepwalk off a cliff. And I think having just come back from Glasgow to where the COP26 was meeting, it was very clear there that there is absolutely no faith in the current politicians to deliver anything but either a kicking the can down the road or just nothing but
or a kick in the
politics.
teeth.
They are not going to deliver. And so the question that arises, and that's I think one of the things that we're all here discussing today in various forms, which I think largely, although there are some disagreements on tactics and so on, I think largely we're all in agreement that there needs to be an alternative. And I think that's the position that a lot of people are coming to. And obviously we're at various stages of that. And I think, in Britain, for instance, we have to overcome the immense media empires. We have to overcome the huge obstacles before us. But I think when you speak to most ordinary working class people, most people aren't apathetic. They are antipathetic because they're angry, but they, at this stage, don't know where to channel that anger into. And I think that anger will explode onto the scene in many different forms, and we would hope to certainly bring it into the Socialist Party and use it to push forward the idea that we need to overthrow capitalism. But I think it's going to be like opening Pandora's box. It's going to come in many different forms. We're going to see many different movements, many different trends come out, and hopefully more discussions like this taking place about the kind of future that is needed and the kind of things we need to organize around.
I mean, maybe the Tories will start. Sorry, but maybe the Tories will start wheeling out scapegoats, so we can really start reliving the 1930s.
So this is one of the things that kind of gives me a lot of hope. And interestingly enough, it deals with Trump to a certain extent, because like my father, lifelong Republican, was ready to vote in 2016. He was ready to vote for Bernie Sanders before Hillary squeezed him out, And after that, only after Bernie was squeezed out, did my dad vote for Trump. Now, here's the thing. Trump, if you look at the way he signals, the way he tries to talk like a tough guy, his mannerisms indicate to people who are members of the working class that he's one of them.
Yeah, Trump outlefted the left. Right?
Yeah, he outlefted the left because of the performance that he put on. Now, of course, he was no more working class. He was the least working. No, Hillary Clinton was more working class than Donald Trump.
On a platform of drain the swamp, right?
Yeah.
Like spoke to exactly what people wanted. It was the zeitgeist of the time.
He was even Medicare for all. I mean,
well, we're still tragically waiting to hear for his Medicaid plan.
Yeah,
which is pending any minute.
Yeah, the point being is that it seems like the working class actually does hold a great deal of political power and can probably make or break politicians going forward. The problem is that the working class at the moment in the United States and much of the first world is totally overcome by false consciousness, but as you guys pointed out with the Tory who came up, and then suddenly you're like, well, what about these policies? And he's like, oh, actually, that sounds great. you saw him breaking through a level of that false consciousness. So when he came up and he said, you know, I'm a Tory, I'm against everything that you guys are for, he was essentially saying, this is my tribe and you are the enemy tribe. And you were able to break through that, again, by appealing to him on the level of working class politics that people within the working class want. What we need to see in, I think, moving forward, if we want to unify the left, is we need to do that. Like, we need to have policies take center stage,
famously,
not personalities.
The right wants to unify and will find any reason to win an election and pretend to have a common cause.
As an old comrade of mine from Northern Ireland, his name is Sean Brogan, and he said to me more than once, you know, Duncan, there are encouraging signs of polarization. Division is good. Class division, understanding who the enemy is. And on what Brenton said, you know, I've got an even more encouraging story. So I met a guy, an American, from the east of California, from a little village. He didn't vote Republican because his family were evangelical Christians who believed that all the government was created by Satan, right? His family were totally, unbelievably, you know, radical Christian right. He voted Republican in his early years. He went to university. He got a PhD in biology. He worked in France. He worked in England. His politics changed. He has now joined the Socialist Party. He's a comrade of ours in Plymouth. He's called Dan Felmley. He's now revolutionary Trotskyist. He's made an incredible journey from being, you know, the son of evangelical Christians who wouldn't vote because this, you know, the government is created by Satan, to being a Republican. By now he's a revolutionary. You know, our ideas fundamentally are very, very powerful, but not everyone is going to make that journey. Mm-hmm. Crucially, we have to be able to link the struggles that people are going through. If you're you know, a Pennsylvanian worker in the Rust Belt of America, and your traditional industry has been destroyed by successive Republican and Democrat administrations, and you feel that no government represents you, and then someone like Trump comes through and says, we're going to drain the swamp, and we're going to build a wall, and we're going to do that, you'll say, great, it's change of some kind. Things can't possibly get any worse. At least if they're going to change things, it will be a change. You know, Brexit, you know, our movement supported Brexit for very different reasons, but most people in England voted Brexit because it was a vote against the establishment. The main parties were supportive of Brexit, and they instinctively felt, whatever these politicians are advocating, this is something we have to oppose. Whatever they're telling us we have to do the opposite. The task for us all now, anarchists, Trotskyists, revolutionaries, anti-capitalists of any kind, is to try to funnel that discontent into something positive, into something revolutionary, into something that will change the absurd situation that we have at the moment. And, you know, as Ryan said earlier, the discussions about this or that method and about, you know, methods of organization, we will have, and we will argue very fiercely when that moment comes. But the point is, right now, there is no mass working class organization, cross-country organization to fight capitalism. We have to build this. You know, I'm brought back to the first international, which was founded by Marx in 1867, and that included Bakunin, who Brent has organized. Marx and Bakunin fought ferociously in the first international. Yep, absolutely at loggerheads for the whole time. I believe Marx and Engels had the correct method in that. You, Brenton, believe that Bakunin was right. But the point is, it was an attempt to build a working class revolutionary movement to oppose what at the time was a political domination of the bourgeoisie, of the capitalist class. And I feel that in our moment in time, the task is very similar. You know, we have to have a kind of united front if you will, to borrow a phrase from Trotsky, against capitalism. And then when we've got a movement together, we'll have this discussion again, and it will be much less friendly than what we've had tonight. But, but at the moment, yeah, we are all facing the same task.
All right, just so long as in that that discussion, it's not, you know, jailing us and killing us like the Bolsheviks constantly did to the anarchists after that.
I'll give you a good reference, Brenton. I'll give you a good reference.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think one of the things that Chris raised just now is the idea, you know, that there is this idea of the left always arguing and splintering and so on. But it's worth pointing out that the difference between the left and the right is that, you know, the right, in representing capital, can very easily whip up new formations and seem broader than it is. I mean, just to give the example, here in Britain, I don't know if you probably have heard of Nigel Farage. You know, he organised in the UKIP party, and then once the Brexit vote was achieved, we saw him throw up a new iteration, the Brexit Party, and then, you know, when that ceased to fulfil a function, he threw up Reform UK, and, you know, you're seeing him constantly throwing out new parties every 5 minutes, but it has the illusion of having a much greater presence and appeal simply because, you know, he's able to throw millions of pounds behind it and create a new machine sort of out of nothing. Whereas obviously when leftists have these arguments and disagreements and debates, you know, we don't often have those we don't have
resources,
although some of the similar ideas come out, and, you know, like this evening, there's been plenty of points of agreement that I think we can certainly come together on, and I think, you know, that it would be a mistake to think that just because the right has more resources, it's in a position to therefore be able to continue dominating, when I think, you know, especially when we look at the situation as it is now, because of the crises that are unfolding in capitalism, you are seeing huge splits amongst those right-wing formations. And if we take the example of the Conservative Party in Britain, they are shielded at the moment by the fact they don't have a credible opposition. Keir Starmer is absolutely useless as an opposition party, and in fact, you know, effectively trying to pose himself as the safe pair of hands for capitalism against the chaos of Boris Johnson. But, you know, if you had an effective opposition, the Tory party would, you know, be splintered apart simply because at this point in time it is rife with contradictions. You know, you have the fact that Boris Johnson is the leader, and he represented the Brexit wing that has always really been the outlier in the Conservative Party.
Can I disagree with you there?
Yeah, go for it.
I think the Conservative Party is about to splinter precisely because they have no effective opposition. It will be the downfall of the modern Conservative Party. I think, really. The opposition is so weak that, that is why the Conservative Party is about to go through their classic leadership contest.
You know, I think if they had an effective opposition, you would see the Tory party unravel a lot quicker than it has.
I think they'd rally into some sort of sincere and genuine threat. At the moment, it's a fucking joke. I think in a sense of a parody.
Chris, in a sense, I think you're correct, insofar as when class lines are clearly drawn, the opposing forces mobilize on either side of those class lines. The problem is, as Ryan has said, the Labour Party in Britain, just as the Democratic Party in America, are on the other side. They can't propose an effective opposition because they are fundamentally now a capitalist party.
Yes. This is why Keith Stammer stumbling to say anything. I think Corbyn was the first genuine opposition, which is why David Cameron had to try so hard to appear so credible, and why now we're faced with Boris Johnson.
why the army had to go out of their way to make clear that if he ever had any fucking chance of getting in power, they would get rid of him.
Also, all the internal machinations against Corbyn, just the fact that as soon as any kind of alternative to a capitalist hegemony rears itself, it's being dogpiled.
Oh, the most credible opposition to Corbyn was from the Labour Party. Absolutely.
Yeah, but you get dogpiled even from within your own party as well as from the opposition. Although saying that, Theresa May wasn't exactly effective against Corbyn. I don't think that he would have lost the election had not been for the Labour Party. But that's, yeah.
What is the situation in Sweden, Toby? I'd be very interested to hear a little bit about what.
It's stumbling from a shit show to another. So, I mean, we have a on paper socialist government. We have the Social Democrats in charge, the Labour Party, who are also then being supported by my party, the Communists. Or sorry, the Left Party, the Socialist Party.
But yeah, in Malmo you have these refugee camps which are treated with great violence by the forces of the state. It's very is that right, or am I
I wouldn't say they're refugee camps, but you have like refugee housing.
Yeah. But
they're usually like old barracks, but yeah.
Wait, are you saying that Tim Pool was wrong when he went into the no-go zone?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the argument. Sorry, but yeah.
I'm curious because I mean most of what we get in the British media about Sweden is how refugees in Sweden.
Yeah, photos of cars on fire.
Oh right, yeah. I mean,
and how they're viciously oppressed by the Swedish
at the moment,
state.
I am on fire because a refugee has, as you can see, set fire to me and my house.
No.
However, not the reason why. Well, just continue. What happened was then last 3 elections, we've had a very weak coalition where the Social Democrats have first teamed up with the Green Party and the Socialists. And then they've had to basically face almost obliteration at every single election. And in order to like hang on to power, they've accepted a conservative budget every single time. So basically, we have on paper a red-green party ruling, however, with a blue, a conservative budget, which has basically been. Yeah, so we have been ruled by this conservative budget, which is gutting our social welfare system, which Sweden used to be famous for, but we are gutting it. However, so people are just so pissed off about the situation. But it is the Reds and the Greens who've been the face of it, even though they're enacting blue policies, and it's so frustrating. However, the fucking final nail in the coffin is in the last election when they kicked out the Greens because they're not viable anymore, and instead had to take on 2 neoliberal parties. The Liberal Party and the Centrist Party. And they had to bring these 2 parties into the coalition to keep the fascists out. The Alternative for Sweden Party, your UKIP party, basically the nationalists.
So thank you, Toby. That perfectly sets up the question I was going to ask. I don't know if you're familiar with the Proletariat, but for those who are, his argument is very Leninist. He says that democracy will always fail because of corporate interests will always outbid, no matter how powerful your democratic wishes are, corporations will always be more powerful and their interests more worth funding. And so he becomes very anti-democratic and says that democracy is a middle-class tool that needs to be overthrown. Gentlemen, how do you respond to that?
Toby, do you want to respond or can I?
I'm still angry about Sweden, so yeah.
All right. So, and Proletariat was my partner for the debate with Stefan Molyneux. So you definitely go and look that up.
Yeah, we did a great podcast episode with him. I'm a big fan, by the way, but that's his opinion that I struggle with the most.
I reject this categorically, and I'll tell you why. So first of all, he's playing a bit of a game there with democracy in that he's talking simply about bourgeoisie, liberal republican democracy, which is not the only formation of democracy. I favor direct democracy. There's options of liquid democracy. There are ways of curbing corporate power. The best way that I, as an anarchist, see of curbing corporate power is to democratize the corporations. Like literally with worker ownership and workers taking control of the means of production, we don't have to run into a situation where the interests of the public are in direct conflict with the interests of powerful corporations. If the workers own their workplaces, then those workplaces will reflect the will of the workers. So yeah, the problem with bourgeoisie democracy is it doesn't go far enough. And it doesn't give people real power. It just gives them an illusion of power and a process by which to express their political ideas and identity, but not the ability to actually effectively change things or challenge the forces of capital. So yeah, you don't toss democracy out, because then what's the alternative? Autocracy?
I think this brings us right back to the beginning of this whole discussion when, Chris, you described yourself as a social democrat, a democratic socialist, Marx, Engels, Lenin, Rosa Luxemburg, all of the original Marxists self-described as social democrats. This is what they meant, exactly what, Brent, you're talking about. Democracy that extends beyond the bounds of electing this or that bastard who's going to run things for the next 4 years. You actually have an active participation in the way that your society is run. This is what we, demand. I think even in the Russian Revolution, there were the two main parties, the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks, whenever the Bolsheviks were trying to put forward proposals for workers' control of production and control of the factories and for the creation of Soviets, and for the Mensheviks would hide behind this idea of democracy as a kind of abstract principle. Democracy is not abstract. It's concrete. It's who is really involved in this democracy. Democracy comes from, the Greek kratos, power, demos, the people. The people, for us as communists, socialists, whatever you like to call it, the people is the workers, the majority. Are we in control? Are we deciding what we produce, who goes to who? What work do we do? Who is our boss? Is he someone who we democratically elect, or is he someone who is imposed upon us? Democracy is a form is a word that has changed its meaning through different kinds of class relations, through, capitalism. Even before capitalism existed, there were the petty bourgeois democrats. What we mean by democracy is something fundamentally different from what somebody like Molyneux would argue is really democracy. We have to, this is something that we have to make very clear when we're having these discussions with people. We are not anti-democratic. We're pro-democratic. We want to expand democracy beyond the realms of these basically pointless elections that we have every 4 years. Mm-hmm. We want everyone to be democratically involved in how they run their own lives. That's the most democratic system you could possibly imagine. That's what real democracy is. That's what we fight for and what we agree with.
Yeah, I agree 100% there. The idea when you'll hear reactionaries in the United States, Molyneux or somebody say stuff like democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting over what's for dinner. You like, okay, why would two wolves need to vote with sheep? They're wolves. To just eat the sheep. You idiots. But yeah, so there's a lot of dumb people.
Yeah.
But the working class is not a sheep.
It's definitely not.
And Stephen Molyneux is not a wolf.
Yeah. By the way, he gets very mad if you call him Stephen. So start calling him Stephen. I did it by accident.
Stephen is not a wolf.
Yeah. No, I think the points have really been made. I think, under our current democracy, we're all free to dine at the Ritz, but the problem is none of us can afford to. The idea, I mean, it's about what you understand democracy to mean, because if you mean the current bourgeois democratic system, then of course, I see the immense limitations of it. I engage with it in terms of building a party and showing a different alternative, but recognizing that true power doesn't come from just putting a X in a box and electing someone that's going to oppress you for the next 5 years. It is about recognizing the power of strike action, of occupation, of redefining our relationship with the means of production. And so in summation, you cannot control what you don't own. The only way we're going to fundamentally change society is if we extend democracy into the economic realm rather than abolishing democracy.
Exactly. Once we own the means of production, once the workers are in control of their own work, and what the wealth that they produce is distributed socially, then the basis for the state, for this whole apparatus of parliamentary democracy, will become obsolete. It is fundamentally based on exploitation. It's based upon the extraction of surplus wealth from workers. That is the fundamental basis of the way the system works, and that is what we've got to overthrow. And it's through our trade unions and through the worker struggles that we can do that.
Until very recently, I was a shop worker, and we're one of the things that's coming in, obviously, in a lot of shops at the moment is automation, and this is a huge problem for capitalism, because rather than freeing people up from their daily toils, it is essentially implementing new technology to put people onto the dole queue, or unemployment benefits. And this highlights the huge problem that we currently face with capitalism, is that we have new technologies that are essentially a disaster under the current regime. We need to organize our society so that we can start to free ourselves up. We can start using automation to free ourselves, to emancipate us from our toils. But we're not going to do that while the bosses still run society, because for them, the difference is, if they continue running as they are, they get obscene profits, and they get to live off the backs of our labor. What we're striving for is the fundamental transformation of society. And I guess if we're going to closing statements, I would say that the way that needs to happen is through the fundamental reorganization of society on a socialist basis. As a member of the Socialist Party, part of the Committee for a Workers' International, that's where I believe that struggle will come from. And I think this debate has been very refreshing, because I think there are many points of agreement, that there are far more points of agreement than there are points of disagreement. And I think those disagreements are important, and even within our own organizations. I mean, Lenin himself said that a party that has no disagreements is a dead one. They'll through the coming rocky period we're about to go through, there are going to be immense issues thrown up. There are going to be new mass movements. There are going to be immense struggles ahead of us. I think what we're fundamentally in agreement with is that we need to overthrow capitalism. I think it simply comes down to a matter of tactics, how we are going to overthrow it, by what means, and what vehicles. I think we need to do it through the organization of an international party, through the building and organization of mass movements, and encouraging mass parties and formations, through workers expressing their power through the use of strike action, through occupations. And I am very excited about the future. I think we are going through it feels like history is being written every day. And I think whilst it's very easy to despair at what currently is, I think it's far better to be excited about what very much can be. And I think more people are opening up to those possibilities, and seeing how disastrously our current system cannot in any way provide for the overwhelming majority. I think it's going to be interesting having this debate on a more and more regular basis, because people are going to be looking to the different tactics that are going to be used, and I certainly look forward to more of us having this conversation, because I think that's the way, the trend that is we're currently going down. So I look forward to continuing this struggle and hopefully crossing paths again. It's certainly nice to see that I wasn't. I look back to my time in politics, and it's refreshing to see that others that have come through the experience of Occupy, for instance, have not gone back to sort of political inactivity afterwards. It's clear that people are desperately looking for alternatives, and I'm encouraged by the fact that more and more people I speak to now have done some background reading before even getting involved with organisations. There is clearly a searching for alternatives now. The question is, what is the alternative that's going to achieve the lofty goals which we aspire to? And so I would certainly hope that will be in the organisation that I'm part of and that I promote. But I look forward to a million flowers blooming and seeing what the future lies, and look forward to having more of these conversations, and hopefully organising in united fronts on the things that we do agree with and can come together on. So I guess for me that's probably my closing statement before I drag this on for far too long.
It was beautiful. Thank you. So I got to be honest, I called this chat not a debate / fight.
I love how you said it's not a debate. You keep saying that, and then everybody keeps saying it's a debate.
But I mean, honestly, the whole point of the discussions such as this is to find the fascinating differences of opinion, right? But that's the problem with the intellectual left. We enjoy discussing the edge cases and the nuance, while faced with a bunch of grifters who will really sway with the wind and pretend to believe whatever's politically expedient in the outrage du jour. The most important thing of this conversation was I was conflating anarchists with libertarians, and I know why now, having researched it. I've understood that the right libertarians are intentionally, as we've alluded to in this conversation, co-opting the terms for their own purposes. It's very easy to blame the government and the power as an abstract thing, and when you say, cool, let's change the system, they're fuzzier on that, and they don't really want to do it, and they believe that no change will result in a good change somehow. That is definitely not what I'm feeling here, and I think, as we've all said, we're more aligned than we're different. I think our biggest enemy is probably apathy. I don't even worry about infighting on social media, because we all do that as a hobby rather than actual practice. It's fine to sharpen our tools.
As Duncan also pointed out, by the time the socialists take power again, we can have proper infighting, but with guns.
That I look forward to. I think, the simplistic perspective on my take as a soc dem, whatever you want to call it, was the idea that if we nationalize capital, so if we made it possible for everyone to get a loan, if every business could compete on equal footing, because the people would loan money to the people, and then I'd go upstream of the problems of capitalism, right? But what I've realized in the last year through education and radicalization is that will not be possible without political power, and political power will not be possible without a unified base of people, some of whom will sometimes disagree with, but that's okay, because our disagreements with our enemies are far worse anything that's come up in this conversation.
Absolutely. I guess I'll just say to sort of put a cap on this, it is really interesting that you did bring two anarchists to talk to two Trotskyists, and that Trotsky had the right take on, aside from the conscription, had the right take on the Spanish Civil War that the chance was to attack. And I will note that even though Trotsky did give the order to betray Nestor Makhno and the Black Army, he also, Stalin was the one that really betrayed the anarchists during the Spanish Civil War, and then promptly got around to losing the war to the fascists. My point in this being is that, our greatest enemies at this point are not each other. There are, Stalin's dead, Trotsky's dead. What we all have a new world to build together, and I'm very excited to see what happens as we move into the future.
Beautiful.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was wonderful. That was better than any debate could have been. Thank you sincerely for your time. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. This was a blast. Good talking to you guys.
Marxists and anarchists have always been on the front lines of all fights against fascists, the far right in every country. We've never had an opportunity to seriously disagree for about 100 years. I'm looking forward to when we can really disagree properly.
Disagree in power, right?
Talk about the Spanish War. You say that Trotsky at least had the right idea. I mean, say what you will about Trotsky, and I love the guy. He knew he knew how to fight. He was a great organizer and a military leader.
And he kicked the shit out of that guy who hit him with the mountain climbers axe.
He did. He hit him with an ice pick. He survived to punch him a couple of times,
and then tell his bodyguards not to kill him because he needed to be interrogated.
Well, if any of you are interested, on the 28th of this month, on Sunday at 3 p.m., we are reading Trotsky's. It's basically his last will and testament. The Death Agony of Capitalism, which he wrote in exile in Mexico about a year before he was kicked the shit out of with the ice pick.
Well, ice axe. It was a mountain climbing axe as opposed to an ice pick. At least in the United States.
Ramon Mercader. He was a Mexican Stalinist who was hired to kill him, but he'd written this transitional program, which was his proposal for how socialist revolutionaries should work, and we're going to have a reading group. It's going to be streamed on Twitch. It's going to be on Zoom. We'd be very happy. Yeah, we can send you the link if you yourself, Toby and Brenton, wanted to join the discussion. You'd be more than welcome. We're wonderful to have you along.
Yeah, it might be a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, by all means, if I send you the link, Chris, it's on the 28th. It's on a Sunday.
I will distribute it.
It's at 3 p.m. GMT, so that would be it'll be quite early. It'd be about 9 o'clock in the morning in America.
Trotsky for breakfast.
Trotsky for breakfast, Brenton. Yeah.
If I can make it, I will. That is, I'm going to point out that is right after the holidays, and I'm going to have 3 Thanksgivings in a row this year.
Wow. I'm fully supportive of Thanksgiving. It's a totally secular, non-religious holiday. Absolutely,
subtle genocidal undertones, but
there's that. But also, turkey is delicious.
But it's not even that delicious. I don't know. Turkey's
it's a bit dry.
You got to cook it right. There's
I've got to come to America and have Americans cook it right.
This reminds me of when people say, "Oh, but have you had this band on weed?" And you're like, "Yeah."
Turkey on weed.
Here's what you do if you want to get a turkey that's like really good and juicy.
I love
awesome,
this
crispy
as the
skin.
bonus content at the end of the episode.
I want Brenton's turkey recipe now.
Yeah. So this is what you do. It's called beer can turkey. You get yourself
turkey. I'm with you.
Yeah, you get yourself like a big can of like Foster's or Heineken, like one of the big keg cans. You cut off the top. You drink 2/3 of the beer, you leave about 1/3 of the beer in there, you fill it with spices, stand the turkey up, pop the the can in its butt. It'll look a little like modern art. Cover it with tin foil and roast it that way. The evaporating beer will crisp the skin, and it'll keep like the whole turkey just deliciously moist.
Sounds absolutely fantastic. Oh God. Yeah, I'm coming to your ass for Thanksgiving, Brent. Sorry.
For our podcast listeners that aren't a fan of Marxist debate but have made it this long, congratulations. That's the bonus content you were waiting for.
I'm really hungry now.
Advert break. Ad break.
Thank you, gentlemen, so much. If anyone's recorded locally a backup version, please send it to me.
Nope.
Whatever medium. I will edit it. It will take far too long to edit, but yes, it will be out probably by the end of the month.
Awesome. Well, I will catch you guys later. This has been great. If you can also, if somebody can send me the video link as well, that would be awesome because I'll put it out on my channel. All right. I'll catch you guys later.
Solidarity, comrades and friends.
Absolutely. Adelante.
Under no pretext.
Adelante. Non passaran. Non passaran.
It's surrender. I wanted to go into a whole theory about power, and in order to democratize power, we need to give everyone guns, but there was just no scope for it. Because fundamentally, that is what political power is. It's just the ability to inflict violence upon a people. And, you know, we dress it up very nicely with sort of democratic institutions and yada, 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 yada. But at the end of the day, it's basically a monopoly of violence. That is what the government is. That is what the state is. And in order to democratize power, we thus need to democratize violence, which means arming the people and pushing out the tools of the oppressors, i.e. the police, out of our communities, as well as providing mutual aid and actually creating alternative institutions to support the people in a sort of non-hierarchical way. But it's just, I don't know, he's talking about spatial war instead.
So Ryan, I'll give you some advice for how to edit a podcast. When Toby starts on a monologue like that, where he's clearly reading his notes that he didn't manage to get out, you just put over some sick techno tunes, techno tunes, and then that's the outro. Done.
I like that you think that I have notes.
You look like you were reading.
No, I'm just gazing wistfully into space.
The void was speaking to you then, clearly.
Yeah, I'd never take notes. I mean, no, actually, that's a lie. I do write notes, which I then studiously ignore. But for today, I just went completely blind. I don't even know what anarchism is.
I need to read Kropotkin at some point. I haven't yet. But anyway, gents, that went much better than I thought it was going to go, so I think.
Yeah, no, thanks for arranging this. I'm assuming you're already not in Plymouth?
I'm still in Plymouth.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Traveling on Monday and then flying on Tuesday, and then I'm out of the country.
Don't you have like 4 D&D things and something else tomorrow before you're flying?
Yeah. Tomorrow's going to be a busy evening.
Let me know the moment you're back. We need Catan 2, and you'll have dinner. And
I'm so sad I'm missing this music festival, which is going to be massive, by the way, and it would be even more massive if I was helping involved. But at the last meeting, I gave away all my secrets. I just said, look, let the bands be your greatest marketing asset. Like, yeah, the success of the thing will hint on them being proud that they're involved.
Yeah, awesome. Well, keep in touch. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely lovely to listen to you guys chat, and God bless and all the rest of it.
See you tomorrow, Toby.
Let's burn down society. Bye.
Take care, Ryan. Take care.
Cheers.